Welcome back to Omni Wizard, where the legends never stay in their own universes. Today's adventure: what if Harry Potter was the strongest Avenger and Black Widow, Scarlet Witch and Captain Marvel fought over him? If you're enjoying these stories, take a second to smash that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a single one. Now let's begin. Chapter 1: The strongest of us. The sky over Manhattan had turned the color of a bruise, and Natasha Romanoff was running out of bridge. She vaulted the burning hood of a taxi, came down hard on her bad knee, and kept moving, because stopping was the one luxury the day refused to offer. Above her, the things pouring out of the rift were not quite Chitauri, and not quite anything she had a name for: chitin and hydra alloy welded together by someone who had decided that the worst of two worlds made a better third. They came in waves, and the waves did not break. They simply kept coming, washing across the East River in a tide of teeth and gunmetal, and the city behind her had begun to make the low animal sound that cities make when the people inside them understand all at once that no one is coming. "Tactical, I need eyes," she said into the calm, because panic was a tell and tells got people killed. "How many more behind the first wave?" "All of them," Sam answered, which was Sam's way of saying he didn't know and the number was bad. The Falcon banked overhead, redirected a stream of plasma into the river with a hard cut of his wings and lost altitude doing it. "Nat, the hive's not on the ground, it's up. There's a mouth in the sky and it is not closing." She looked up. He was right. The rift hung above the financial district like a wound that had been told it could not heal, edges crawling, and through it she could see something on the other side that her mind declined to fully resolve, a geometry that did not want to be looked at. She had spent 20 years learning to read rooms, faces, the half-second before a man decided to lie. That skill found no purchase here. There was nothing to read, there was only the size of it. A shadow crossed the sun and the shadow was gold. Carol Danvers hit the leading edge of the swarm at a speed that turned the air into a thunderclap, and for about 10 seconds the math changed. She went through them like a thrown star, fists wrapped in light, and where she passed the tide thinned and screamed and fell. Natasha allowed herself the breath she'd been postponing. Then she watched three of the larger things peel off the main body, converge, and take Carol between them in a coordinated crush of bodies that no animal should have been smart enough to plan. The gold light guttered. Carol came down through the roof of a parking structure 2 blocks over and the concrete swallowed the sound. "Carol's down," Natasha said. "Carol's down. I need someone on the parking deck on Liberty now." "On it," said Steve, somewhere to her left, and she heard the shield ring off something and a man grunt who had absolutely no business still being on his feet after the day he'd had. "Nat, we can't hold the line. We're not holding it. We're just choosing where to lose it." He wasn't wrong. That was the thing about Steve, he was almost never wrong, and he said the true thing in the kind voice, which was somehow worse. They had been fighting since a little after dawn. It was now past noon. The Avengers were the best in the world at the work of stopping the unstoppable, and the unstoppable had simply brought more of itself than they had ever brought of themselves. And arithmetic, in the end, did not care how brave you were. She put 3 rounds into the joint of a thing the size of a delivery van as it came over the median. And the rounds did what rounds always did to these, which was teach it to respect her without convincing it to die. It reared. She rolled under the swipe of a limb that left a trench in the asphalt where her spine had been, came up inside its reach, found the soft seam where chitin met hydro plating, and emptied the rest of the magazine into it at a range that finally settled the argument. The thing folded, 2 more climbed over its body to take its place, because that was the day, that was the whole day, every problem you solved becoming the staircase the next one climbed. Down the avenue she could see Steve working, the shield going out and coming back, going out and coming back, a metronome of a man holding a doorway against the tide so the last of the evacuees could clear the subway stairs behind him. He would hold it until it killed him. That was not a figure of speech with Steve. He would simply stand there being the door until there was no more Steve to be won, and the worst part, the part Natasha had never said to him, was that she trusted him to know exactly how much door he had left and to spend it to the last splinter. A child was crying somewhere in the stalled traffic. She could hear it under everything else, the specific frequency a human ear is built to never stop hearing. She started toward it on instinct, and a slab of falling cornice forced her back, and when the dust cleared the sound had stopped, and she made herself not know what that meant, because knowing it now would cost her the next 10 minutes, and the next 10 minutes were not hers to spend. The line broke, briefly, near the water. It broke the way lines break, not all at once but at the seam where one tired person's reach ended and the next began, and the welded horrors found the seam the way water finds a crack in a dam. A dozen of them poured through toward the cluster of civilians still trapped in a stalled crosstown bus, and Sam saw it in Dove, and one wing clipped a streetlight on the way down and sent him cartwheeling, and for a 6 second there was nothing between the bus and the swarm but distance, and distance was running out. Natasha was too far. She knew she was too far, the way you know the bullets already left the chamber, and she ran anyway, because running at the thing you cannot reach in time was the job, was the whole job, was what they did instead of looking away. She would not reach it. The math said she would not reach it. Then a wall of red caught the dozen horrors midair and folded them backward into the river, and Wanda Maximoff dropped out of the smoke with both hands blazing and her face set against the strain of holding a thing the size of a bus crash in the air by will alone. "Go," she shouted at the trapped civilians, at the ones tumbling out of the bus doors. "Go, run, I have it, I have it." And she held the swarm off the fleeing knot of people for the 11 seconds it took them to clear, 11 seconds that cost her something visible. And then she let the red go and sagged in the air and grinned at Natasha across the wreck like a woman who just won a hand she had no business being dealt. "That's the third time today you've been somewhere I couldn't be," Natasha said into the calm, and meant it as the highest thing she knew how to say. "It is the job," Wanda said, which was Natasha's own line handed back to her, and the two women shared the half-second of grim warmth that was all the day would allow. And then the next wave came, and the seam reopened somewhere else, and there was no version of this they were going to win on their own, and both of them knew it, and kept fighting anyway, because the alternative was to stop, and stopping was the one thing the day refused to forgive. That was the morning. Hours of it. Every save a loan against a debt that kept compounding, every held line a place they would lose a little later instead of a little sooner. They were the best in the world, and the best in the world was, today, not going to be enough, and the slow arithmetic of that worked its way through even Natasha's discipline until it reached the cold floor underneath, the place where she kept the decisions she hated. So Natasha did the thing she had promised herself she would not do again, because the last time she had done it she had not liked who she became while she waited for the answer. "Potter," she said into the calm, "wherever you are, we need you." For a moment there was only the static and the screaming and Sam's labored breathing. Then the wind changed. It came from the north off the harbor, and it carried a smell that had no place in a war, cut grass, wood smoke, the inside of an old library. The temperature dropped 4 degrees in a single breath. Every loose paper in lower Manhattan lifted at once, 10,000 sheets rising off the streets in a slow gray spiral, and through that paper, walking, came a man who did not appear to be in any particular hurry. He was not large. That was the first thing people always got wrong about him in the after-action reports, the way they remembered him as some towering thing, when in fact Harry Potter was an ordinary height with an ordinary build and a head of black hair that had given up on order around the same time she suspected that he had. He wore a coat the color of a storm at sea and no armor at all, and his hands were in his pockets, and he was looking up at the impossible mouth in the sky with the mild, slightly put-upon expression of a man who has come home to find that the dog has gotten into the bins again. "Right," he said. The calm picked it up. He wasn't wearing one. "That's enormous." "Who let it get that enormous?" "Potter," Steve said, relief cracking the discipline in his voice. "The rift is feeding them. We can't." "I can see what it's doing, Steve." Harry took one hand out of his pocket. He didn't raise it dramatically. He turned it over, palm up, the way you might to check for rain. "Everyone whose hours get low now would be lovely." Natasha got low. She had learned, over the 11 months she had known him, that there was a particular flatness that entered his voice right before the world rearranged itself around his opinion of it, and she had learned to respect that flatness as she respected the click of a safety coming off. The light, when it came, was not gold like Carol's. It was silver going to green, the green of deep water and old glass, and it did not blaze, it spread. It came off of him in a single expanding ring, soundless, and it crossed the swarm the way dawn crosses a field, not striking, simply arriving, and everywhere the light touched the welded horrors they stopped. Not died, stopped. Mid-lunge, mid-shriek, mid-fall, 10,000 bodies arrested in the air as though the entire battle had been a photograph all along, and someone had finally held still long enough to take it. The screaming cut out. The city went so quiet that Natasha could hear her own pulse and the absurd small rustle of all that newspaper settling back down onto the streets. Harry looked up at the rift. He sighed the way you sigh at a stubborn jar. "You don't get to be here," he told it almost gently, and he closed his hand. The mouth in the sky did not explode. Explosions were for problems you could not address at the root. The rift simply ceased to have ever been open. Natasha's memory of the last 6 hours flickered, just for an instant, around the question of whether the sky had been torn at all. and the 10,000 suspended bodies, denied the throat that had vomited them up, came apart into the same gray ash that the paper had nearly become, and the wind took them out over the water and was gone. The sun came back. It was, Natasha noted with the part of her brain that never stopped noting things, a perfectly nice afternoon. Harry put his hand back in his pocket. He turned, found her across 200 feet of wrecked avenue, and the look he gave her was not the look of a god who had just unmade an invasion. It was tired and a little apologetic, and unmistakably the look of a man checking whether his friend was hurt. "You called late," he said. "You answered fast." She straightened, ignored the way her knee filed a formal complaint, and crossed to him over the cracked asphalt. "Carol's in a parking structure on Liberty." She went through the roof. Something moved at the edge of his mouth that was not quite a smile and was certainly not small. "Course she did," Harry said. "Where else would she go?" They found Carol sitting up in a crater of pulverized concrete, surrounded by the rebar she had bent on her way down, picking grit out of her teeth with an expression that dared the universe to comment. "Don't," she said before either of them could. "I wasn't going to say anything," Harry said. "You were thinking it loud." "I genuinely wasn't. I'm not even sure what it is." He offered her a hand. She looked at the hand the way a cat looks at an offered belly, then took it, and let him pull her up out of the wreckage of the third floor she was now standing on top of. Light flickered under her skin where the injuries were already closing. "You held 3 of the big ones by yourself," he went on. "That's not nothing. I held 3 of the big ones and then a building held me." She rolled her shoulder, winced, decided the wince hadn't happened. Her eyes went up past him to the clean blue sky where the rift had been, and Natasha watched the calculation run behind them, the same one that always ran. "You closed it." "I closed it. All of it, the whole, all of them, the rift, all at once. That was the idea, yes." Carol's jaw worked. There was a thing Carol did, Natasha had learned, when she was impressed and hated being impressed and refused on principle to let either show. She got louder and more cheerful, like a woman talking over a sound only she could hear. "You know," she said, "one of these days you're gonna show up to one of these and there's gonna be nothing left for the rest of us to hit. And then what do I do with all this?" She gestured at herself, at the still mending ribs, at the light. "I didn't get shot into space and rebuilt from the photons up so I could stand around watching you tidy." "You could try arriving on time," Harry offered. "I was on time. I was early. It was so early I had time to get thrown through a parking deck." "Then you could try not getting thrown through the parking deck." "Oh, that's the strategy." Carol planted herself in front of him, and she was grinning now, a fighter's grin, all teeth and challenge, and she had to tip her chin up to do it because he had a few inches on her and clearly intended to keep them. "That's the wisdom from the strongest man in the room. Don't get hit. It's worked beautifully for me. Because you don't fight, you edit." She poked him in the chest once, hard enough to move most men and not moving him at all, which Natasha saw her register and pretend not to. "There's a difference. You ever actually let one of these things land on you? You ever take the hit?" "Why on earth would I take the hit if I can decline it?" "Because that's the job, Potter." Carol's voice had dropped half a register, and underneath the brass there was something real in it, something that had been shot into space and rebuilt and had decided, somewhere out there in the dark, that the only meaning left in the universe was the meaning you made by standing between it and the people who couldn't. "You and me, we're the heavy hitters. They count on us to be in it, not above it, in it." For a moment Harry didn't answer, and Natasha, who made her living in the silences between what people said, watched the thing pass over his face that he did not let many people see. It was there, and then it was managed, the way a man steps over a crack in the pavement without seeming to look down. "I'm in it," he said quietly. "Trust me, I'm always in it." Carol opened her mouth to push, because pushing was the only gear she fully trusted. And that was when Tony's voice came over the comm, dry and frayed at the edges with the particular exhaustion of a man who had spent the morning doing the impossible and was annoyed that it had only counted as a warm-up. "As touching as this is, and it is, I'm misting up. Ask Rhodey, could the 2 strongest people on the planet possibly conduct their will-they-won't-they somewhere that isn't a structurally compromised parking facility? We've got civilians in the financial district, a National Guard cordon that thinks we're the threat, and I would like just once to debrief before sundown." "Copy that," Natasha said, and put 2 fingers to her ear and turned to lead them out, and caught in the turning the way Carol's eyes tracked Harry for half a second longer than the situation required, and the way Harry pretended with the practiced ease of a man who had been pretending things his whole life that he hadn't noticed. She filed nothing away. She simply knew it, the same as she knew the exits in every room she had ever stood in. It was going to matter later. Most things did. On the avenue, while the others coordinated the cordon and Tony argued with a National Guard colonel who had not yet decided whether the Avengers were the cavalry or the cause, Harry walked. Natasha walked with him, a half step behind and to the left where she could see his hands. She told herself it was habit. It was habit. It was also that she wanted to watch. He went slowly down the wrecked length of the street, past the burned cars and the buckled hydrants and the long gray scorings where the swarm had dragged itself across the world. And every few steps he would stop and crouch and put his palm flat against the asphalt, and the silver green would breathe out of him, low and unhurried, and the street would remember what it had been. A crushed storefront eased itself back square. A snapped sycamore drew its torn limb up out of the gutter and wore its leaves again. He did it without flourish, the way another man might pick up litter on a walk, and Natasha understood, watching, that this was the part of the work he actually cared about, that the closing of the rift had been a chore, and this was the point, this patient unruining, one square of pavement at a time. You could do the whole block at once, she said. I've seen you do more than this with less. I could. He straightened, rolled his shoulders, moved to the next ruin. But then I wouldn't see them. And somebody should see them before they get scrubbed off the record. He nodded at the scorch marks, at a child's shoe lying alone at the curb, at the place where the cornice had come down. He didn't restore the shoe. He looked at it and left it, and Natasha understood that too and didn't ask, and added it to the long, quiet ledger she kept of him. There was a kid, she said. She hadn't meant to, in the traffic. I couldn't get to him. Harry stopped. He looked at her, and whatever he saw he didn't flinch from, which she gave him credit for because most people flinched. Third car back from the bus, blue sedan, he said quietly. The mother got him under the chassis before it came down, there at the triage point on Pine, both of them, scared out of their minds and entirely alive. He paused. I felt the ones we lost come through. He wasn't one of them, I'd know. She studied his face for the lie, and there wasn't one, and something in her chest that had been clenched since the cornice came down let go all at once, and she was irritated by how much it cost her to keep that off her face. You felt them come through, she repeated. The ones we lost, yes. All of them, Harry said, and crouched again and put his hand to the broken street and didn't elaborate, and the silver-green light went out of him into the world. She let the subject lie there between them on the pavement, because some doors you did not kick. You waited by them until they opened on their own. She was very, very good at waiting. The debrief ran long, the way they always did when the day had been bad enough that everyone wanted to relitigate it in something they could have survived without help. They gathered in the command level an hour after the dust settled. The wide ring of the conference table scattered with tablets and field reports and one of Thor's enormous boots, which he had removed and set on the glass with the unbothered confidence of a man who had never in his long life been asked to explain himself. Thor himself was eating. He had come in late from a matter in New Mexico and arrived hungry, as he generally did, and was working through a tower of takeout with the focus of a man feeding a furnace. He listened, though. People forgot that about Thor. The eating was real, and so was the listening, both at full volume. Run it again, Steve said. He'd showered and changed and looked in the clean light, almost rested, which Natasha knew to be a lie his face told on his behalf. Start to finish. I want to understand how a Tuesday turned into that. A Tuesday turned into that, Tony said, because someone opened a door between here and a place that has a surplus of murder. And our entire early warning architecture, which I built, which is excellent, which I will not apologize for, registered exactly nothing until the door was already a mile wide. He spun a hologram up over the table. The rift reconstructed from satellite, a slow-blooming wound above the financial district. No energy signature I recognize. No tachyon spike, no gamma, no magic flag of the kind Wanda lights up, no offense. It didn't read as anything. It read as the sky deciding to have a hole. Because it wasn't done with technology, Harry said. Every head at the table turned. He had taken the seat at the far end, slightly out of the ring, as he always did near the door, and he had a mug of tea he wasn't drinking, and he was turning a small object over in his fingers, a stone Natasha saw smooth and black, worn at the edges as though it had been handled a great deal over a long time. He stilled it when he caught her looking. It was done with will, he went on. There's a kind of magic, old magic, the kind that doesn't care what universe it's standing in, that doesn't add force to the world. It removes the world's objection. You don't break the wall between two places. You convince the wall it was never there. He set the stone down on the glass with a click that nobody else seemed to find as loud as Natasha did. That's why your instruments slept through it, Tony. Your instruments are very good at noticing when something is added. They've got nothing to say about subtraction. And you can do this, Carol said. She was tilted back in her chair, boots on the table next to Thor's boot, arms crossed, watching Harry with the flat, bright attention of a woman sizing up a sparring partner. Convince walls they were never there. I closed one this afternoon, Harry said mildly. You may have been unconscious in a parking structure for the relevant portion. Thor laughed around a mouthful of noodles, a great delighted bark of it, and pointed his chopsticks at Harry in salute. I like him, he announced to the room like it was news, as he had after every shared battle 11 months running. He fights like a man who has already won and is merely being polite about the timing. Lady Carol, you should not bait him. He will say something true and you will have to be angry about it for an hour. I'm not baiting him, Carol said. I'm establishing a baseline. You're baiting him, Natasha said. I'm establishing a baseline by baiting him. They're not mutually exclusive. But there was a curl at the corner of Carol's mouth as she said it, and she didn't take her boots off the table, and she didn't take her eyes off Harry either. Steve brought them back because someone had to, and someone was always Steve. Potter, the thing in the sky tonight, the skull, you said you knew him. The room changed. Even Thor stopped chewing. I knew him, Harry said. The dryness had gone out of his voice, and what was underneath was very level and very old. His name is Voldemort. In the world I came from, he was the worst thing that had happened in 100 years. And a great many people died teaching me how to end him, and then I ended him, and I was certain. I have never been more certain of anything in my life that he was gone. He looked at the black stone and didn't pick it up. I was wrong about the certainty. I'm rarely wrong about that, but the door that brought me here apparently swung both ways, and he is patient, and he has had time. The mark in the sky tonight wasn't an attack. It was a calling card. He wants me to know he's here. He wants me to spend the night not sleeping. Is it working? Natasha asked. It came out gentler than she'd intended. Harry's eyes came up and found hers, and for a second the level voice and the managed face were both just slightly set aside. It's working a little, he admitted. Then we make sure it stops working, Steve said and stood, and the meeting found its shape the way it always did once Steve decided what the shape would be. Assignments went around the table. Tony would rebuild the early warning net to listen for subtraction as well as addition. Whatever that meant, he said it would take a weekend, and everyone knew it would take a night. Thor would reach to Asgard's records for anything resembling a wizard who wrote on stars. Wanda would work with Harry to understand the resonance between his magic and hers, on the theory that two magics in one universe might find each other across a distance. And Natasha would do what Natasha did, which was learn the enemy, except the enemy this time lived almost entirely inside the head of the one teammate she had never quite finished reading. You and me then, she said to Harry low as the room broke up and Thor reclaimed his boot. Tomorrow. You're going to tell me everything you know about a dead man who isn't dead. That's going to be a long conversation, Harry said. I've got time. She held his gaze a beat longer than the logistics required because she wanted to see what he did with it, and what he did with it was not look away, which was rarer in her experience than it should have been. Sleep, Potter, you'll be useless to me tired. I don't really sleep, he said like a man admitting to the weather. I know, she said because she'd seen the light under his door at every hour she had ever happened to pass it. Try anyway. The compound upstate had been built to look like the future and had aged in the years since into something more honest and more lived in, coffee rings on the conference glass, a dent in the gym wall that no one would admit to, a couch in the common room that had been declared structurally unsound by Tony and adopted as a place of worship by everyone else. Natasha liked it best in the hour after a fight, when the adrenaline drained out and left the building full of the specific quiet of people who had survived another one together. She found Wanda Maximoff in that quiet, alone in the long observation room with its wall of windows, standing very still in the failing light with her arms wrapped around herself, and Natasha almost left her to it. Almost. Wanda had a way of being alone that asked to be respected. But there was a tightness in the line of her shoulders that Natasha had learned to read as the particular kind of trouble that got worse if no one sat down next to it. So she got 2 mugs of the terrible common room tea and went in and sat on the windowsill a careful arm's length away and waited, the way you wait for a frightened thing to decide your furniture. You felt it, Wanda said after a while. She didn't turn from the window. Her accent put a soft burr on the words, rounded their edges. When he closed the rift, you all felt the cold, the lights, the paper, the temperature. I felt it. That's not what I felt. Wanda's hands tightened on her own arms. Red light moved under her fingers, slow, like a thing breathing in its sleep, and she noticed it and stilled it the way you'd quiet a dog before company. When he uses it, the real thing, not the parlor tricks, the real power, I feel it in here. She touched 2 fingers to her sternum. Like a bell, like someone struck a bell in a room I thought was empty, and the whole room is me, and I didn't know it could still ring. Natasha sipped the terrible tea and said nothing, because nothing was occasionally the most useful thing she owned. My power, Wanda went on, and her voice had gone low and rapid, the way it did when she was trying to outrun the size of what she was saying, comes from a thing that should not have happened. An experiment, a stone, a war. It found me because I was already broken open and looking for somewhere to put the grief. I have spent years afraid of it, afraid of what it wants. Afraid that one day I will reach for it and it will not give the thing back. She finally turned. In the dusk her eyes were very dark and very bright at once. And then he walks onto a battlefield, and he does the most enormous thing I have ever seen anyone do, and it does not look like reaching at all. It looks like remembering, like he is simply reminding the world of something it already agreed to. That's a generous reading, Natasha said. He told Carol he edits. He is being modest because being modest is how he is allowed to be that strong without anyone forming a committee about it. A thread of dry humor moved through Wanda's voice, surprising them both, and was gone. I know what reaching looks like from the inside, Natasha. I do it every day. He is not reaching. He has stopped having to. And I want to know how, because if there is a way to hold that much and not be afraid every second that it will eat you. She stopped, pressed her lips together. The red light pulsed once hard at her fingertips and went out. I would like to know, that is all. It is a professional interest. Natasha looked at her for a long moment over the rim of the awful mug. She thought about the way Carol's eyes had tracked him across the parking deck. She thought about the 11 months she herself had spent cataloging Harry Potter. The restraint, the dry kindness, the bottomless thing under the calm that she had never quite gotten the bottom of, which was saying something, because finding the bottom of people was the work she had been built to do. She thought about how very many ways there were for 3 women who did not lose to start, all at once and without admitting it, to want the same thing. Professional interest, Natasha agreed, and let it sit there gently so Wanda would hear how thin it was without having to be told. Sure, Wanda's gaze sharpened. Whatever she would have said next she didn't, because the lights in the observation room dimmed and flickered all at once, and the temperature in the room dropped 4 degrees, and Natasha was on her feet before she'd decided to stand, because she knew that cold now. She had felt it that afternoon over a wrecked avenue, but Harry wasn't in the room, and he wasn't doing this. Harry felt the wrongness from his quarters, where he had been sitting on the floor with his back against the bed and his eyes closed, doing the thing he did after every fight that he had never told anyone about, which was not meditation and was not prayer and was closest, if he was honest, to bookkeeping. He counted the dead, not the things he'd unmade that afternoon. Those had never been alive in the way that mattered, grown things grief made into weapons. He counted the others, the 11 civilians the swarm had taken before he arrived, whose deaths he had felt pass through him at the moment of his arrival, the way you feel a draft when a door opens somewhere in a large house. That was the part of the gift no one understood, because he had been careful never to explain it. The strength they all admired was a side effect. The actual thing he was, the thing the Hallows had made him on a cold night years and a universe ago, was a doorway. Death moved through the world. And now it moved through him, every one of them, the great and the small, the soldier and the sparrow, and he felt each go by like a hand trailing along his ribs. And he had learned to carry it the way you learn to carry a sound you cannot turn off, by building a room around it and keeping the door of that room shut and counting so that at least someone had noticed them leave. 11 that afternoon. He knew their weights without knowing their names. A heavy one that had been a young one, those were always heavy. A light one that had been very old and very ready. He held each of the 11 for the length of a breath, which was the only funeral he could give them, and then he opened the door of the room and let them go, and the silver green at the backs of his eyes dimmed to its banked everyday glow. Lonely was the wrong word for it, and the only word he had. Tony had pepper and 100 running jokes. Steve had a century of being beloved. Thor had a kingdom and a brother and an appetite. They were a family, the Avengers, a loud and bruised and functional family, and they had folded Harry into it with the genuine warmth of people who had room for one more, and he loved them for it, truly. And not one of them could feel what he felt, or carry what he carried, or stand where he stood, which was just slightly outside the window of the warm house looking in, holding the door of a very large room shut so that none of them would ever have to hear what he heard. That was when the cold came that was not his. He was on his feet and moving before the temperature finished dropping out into the corridor, and the silver green woke in his hands all the way as he went, because he knew the shape of this. He had hoped 11 months of hoping, a private hope he'd never said aloud, that the rift that brought him here had closed behind him. That whatever he'd left in the old world had stayed in the old world. That the war that had made him was over and would have the decency to stay over. He came out onto the observation deck, and the others were already arriving, Natasha and Wanda from inside. Carol dropping through the open skylight in a trail of fading gold, Steve and Tony from the command level, and they were all looking up, through the great wall of windows, at the sky. It hung over the dark hills to the north, written in green fire on the early stars, vast and slow and unmistakable. A skull, mouth open, and pouring from the mouth, coiling, alive, a serpent of the same cold light. It turned in the air the way a thing turns when it knows it is being watched and wants to be. The dark mark. Here, over a country that had never learned to fear it, in a world that had no name for it, burning in a sky that until that afternoon Harry had let himself believe was clean. Okay, Tony said into the silence very carefully in the voice of a man who has seen a great deal and would prefer not to add to the collection. I'm going to need somebody to tell me that's one of ours. That's Potter. Potter, talk to me. Is that a you thing? Tell me that's a you thing. It's a me thing, Harry said. Own voice came out steadier than the inside of him, which was a skill like everything else. But it isn't mine. That distinction had better come with a footnote, Tony said. Harry looked at the skull. The serpent poured and poured from its mouth and did not empty, and far underneath the green light, at a frequency he felt rather than heard, something vast and patient and very old was paying attention to him, and only to him the way it always had. It belongs to a man I killed, Harry said. Years ago in another world, I watched him die. I made more certain of it than I have ever made certain of anything. He was aware of all of them watching him, of Natasha gone very still in the way that meant she was memorizing every word, of Wanda's hand half raised with the red light waking at her fingers, of Carol shifting her weight forward onto the balls of her feet because forward was the only direction Carol knew. He kept his eyes on the sky. His name is Voldemort. And if his mark is in your sky, then he found the same door I did, and he came through it after me, and he has been here long enough to learn how to write on the stars. The serpent finished its slow coil and turned its burning head, and across 30 miles of dark hills, in a green that was the exact color of the light Harry kept banked behind his own eyes, it looked directly at him. "Hello again," said a voice in the cold in all of their heads at once, soft as a closing door. "I did wonder where you'd run to." And in the corner of his vision, Harry saw the three of them move at once, Carol's fists igniting, Wanda's hands flaring red, Natasha's pistol clearing its holster, 3 different kinds of power and 3 different kinds of woman, all of them stepping not back from the thing in the sky but forward, and all of them, he noticed, stepping forward to stand beside him. It was a small thing. It was not a small thing at all. "Hello, Tom," Harry said to the sky, and let the silver-green rise to meet the green. "Welcome to the new world. You're not going to like the neighbors." Chapter 1 and Chapter 2, Old Ghosts. Natasha ran interrogations the way other people ran baths. She knew the temperature she wanted, she knew how long it took to get there, and she had never once been surprised by the water. So she was annoyed, sitting across from Harry Potter in the small, windowless room she'd chosen precisely because it gave nothing back, to find that the temperature kept changing on her. "You're not recording this," he said. It wasn't a question. He'd taken the chair without being told which one, the one with its back to the door, which was the chair she would have taken, which meant he'd either read the room or read her, and she didn't love either option. "I'm not recording this. Tony's listening, though. Tony's always listening. He thinks it's a personality." She set a cup of coffee in front of him, real coffee, not the common room sludge, because the first rule of getting someone to talk was to give them one true kindness early, so the rest of the conversation had something to measure against. "Talk to me about the man in the sky." Harry wrapped both hands around the cup and didn't drink it, the same as he hadn't drunk the tea last night, and she added that to the ledger. He liked to hold the warm thing more than he liked to drink it. "Where do you want me to start? The beginning's traditional. The beginning's a children's story." He turned the cup a quarter turn on the table. There was a baby. A man tried to kill the baby. For prophecy reasons that were mostly his own paranoia made load-bearing, and the killing didn't take, and it cost the man his body and gave the baby a scar and a reputation he hadn't earned yet. The man spent the next 17 years getting his body back, and the baby spent them being told he was the only one who could finish it. You can guess which one I was. I had a working theory. That got the edge of a smile out of him, there and gone. It's a terrible way to raise a person, by the way, telling a child he's the only one. It makes him reckless in some directions and a coward in others, and it takes him years to learn which is which. He said it lightly, the way you mention an old injury that only aches in the cold, and Natasha noted the lightness in what it was protecting and did not reach for it yet. His name was Tom Riddle. He called himself Voldemort because Tom Riddle was the name of the father who'd left, and he hated the ordinary thing in himself more than he hated anyone else. He split his soul to keep from dying 7 times. You can do that in my world if you're willing to murder for each piece and live with what's left of you afterward. By the end, there was barely a person in there. Just a will that refused to stop. And you killed him. I died first. Harry said it plainly, watching her, gauging she understood whether she'd flinch. She didn't flinch. It was, she suspected, a kind of test he ran on everyone, and she suspected most people failed it by being either too horrified or not horrified enough. There was a piece of him living inside me. I'd carried it since I was a baby, since the night the curse rebounded. The only way to end him was to let the piece die, and the piece was attached to me, so I walked into a forest and let him kill me, and for a moment I was somewhere else. A station. Very clean, very bright. And then I came back because it turned out I owned death by then, and death doesn't get to keep what it's owned by. Natasha kept her face still, which took more than she would have admitted. You own death. There were 3 objects, old ones older than the war, older than my world's memory of itself. A wand that wins, a stone that calls the dead, a cloak that hides you from death's sight. He took his hands off the cup. From inside his coat he produced the black stone she'd seen last night, smooth and worn, and set it on the table between them, and the temperature in the room dropped half a degree, the way a cellar is colder than a hall. I gathered all three, not on purpose, the way you'd assemble a deck without reading the fine print. And whoever holds all three is what the story calls the master of death. I thought it was a metaphor. Most of the story was a metaphor. He looked at the stone. This part wasn't. She looked at the stone too. She had handled a great many objects in her life that men had killed to possess, and not one of them had made the air in a room feel like the inside of a held breath. What does it do? She said. Actually, not the poem, the function. It means death moves through me now. He didn't dramatize it. If anything, he sounded tired of it, the way you get tired of a chronic condition you've stopped expecting sympathy for. Every death in range, I feel them leave. I can hold the door for a moment, or open it wider, or once or twice when I had no business doing it, close it again, which is a thing you are not supposed to be able to do and which costs more than I have ever told anyone. He met her eyes. That's the part I don't put in the briefings. The strength your team likes, the rift closing, the standing in the light, that's the cheap part. This is the real one. And I'm telling you because you asked the function and not the poem. And because you've been deciding for 11 months whether I'm dangerous, and the answer is yes, and you deserve to know in which direction. The room had gone very quiet. Somewhere in the walls the building hummed to itself. Natasha had built her whole life on the principle that everyone was lying about the size of themselves, smaller or larger, and that her job was to find the true measure under the performance. She had finally found Harry Potter's true measure, and it was bigger than the performance, not smaller, and that was so rare in her experience that she didn't have a procedure for it. Why tell me, she said. Specifically, you could have given me the poem. People give me the poem all the time. Because you got 2 mugs of terrible tea for a woman who frightens you a little last night and sat down an arm's length away so she wouldn't feel cornered. He said it without any heat, flat observation, a man reading a room he wasn't supposed to be able to see. You watch people to know where the exits are. I watch people to know who's about to die. We're in the same business from opposite ends of it, Romanoff. I'd rather be honest with the other person in the room who counts things nobody thanks her for counting. She had been called many things across many languages by men who wanted something. She had not in a long time been seen, and she discovered she had no defense prepared for it, which was its own small alarm. Drink your coffee, she said, to have something to say. It's getting cold. I like holding it better, Harry said, and there it was again, that flicker of dry warmth, and she picked up her own cup so her hands would have an assignment. She drank to prove she could and set the cup down precisely and decided to give him a true thing back because the ledger ran both ways or it didn't run at all. I was made, she said. You should know that if we're going to do this, not born into it the way you were. Made on purpose in a building with a name that translates badly. They took girls and they took the parts of us that argue and they replaced them with technique. I was very good. I was the best they ever turned out, which is not a thing I say to impress you. It's a thing I say so you understand that when I tell you I can read a man's true measure, it cost a great deal of someone else's cruelty to make me able to. Harry didn't say he was sorry. She would have despised him a little if he had. He looked at her the way he'd looked at the chalk drawing in the meatpacking plant they hadn't been to yet, like a thing he intended to understand and possibly undo. And you got out, he said. I got out mostly. You don't get all the way out of a thing like that. You just get far enough that it has to shout to reach you. She turned her own cup a quarter turn on the table, an unconscious mirror of his habit, and caught herself doing it and let it stand rather than make a point of it. I'm telling you because you told me the function and not the poem. There's a debt now. I don't like debts. I'd rather we be even. We're even, Harry said. For whatever it's worth, I think they failed. The people who made you, the arguing part, it's still in there. It's just learned to be quiet, which isn't the same as gone. He paused. I'd know. I spent a great deal of time around the parts of people that the world tried to take. It landed somewhere she hadn't fortified, because she'd had no reason to fortify it, because nobody in 2 decades had told her the cruelty had failed. She picked her cup back up, found it empty, set it down again, and was furious at herself for the tell and saw him decline to notice it, which was its own kind of mercy and made it worse. You're good at this, she said. At what? At making a person feel found. It's a technique. I know the techniques. She held his eyes. I want to know if it's a technique with you or if it's real, because I've spent my whole life unable to tell the difference, and you're the first person who's ever made me hope it might matter which. Harry was quiet for a moment. It's real, he said. That's the trouble with it. A technique you can put down. This I can't. And he picked the coffee back up and held it and didn't drink, and across the small bare table Natasha Romanoff revised her entire estimate of how this assignment was going to go, and did not like, at all, how little she minded. The first Death Eater turned up in a meatpacking plant in Hoboken, which was, Harry reflected as they came in low over the river in the dark, not a sentence he had ever expected to think. Tony's net flagged a subtraction event here at 0200, Natasha said over the comm. She flew the Quinjet as she did everything economically, no motion wasted. Local power grid recorded a dropout it can't explain. 3 night shift workers walked in and didn't walk out, and the cameras show them walking in and then show nothing, like the footage decided to be polite about it. That's him. Harry watched the dark building grow under them, a long, low industrial shed bleeding a faint green at the seams of its loading doors, a color no honest light made. Or his. Voldemort doesn't run errands. He builds people to run them and then convinces them it was their idea. Death Eaters. He'll have found the local equivalent. Frightened men who want to be feared instead. There's never a shortage. He felt the building before they landed, as he always felt these places now. 3 small absences inside it where 3 living men had been a few hours ago. He kept his voice level. 3 dead inside, already, set down on the north side, away from the doors. She glanced at him. She didn't ask how he knew. That was the thing he'd come to value about Natasha Romanoff in the space of a single honest conversation. She took the new information and built it into her plan without making him perform his grief over it. Then we're not rescuing, we're collecting. We're collecting. They went in through a roof vent because Natasha said doors were for people who wanted to be expected, and dropped into a refrigerated cavern of hanging steel and dead fluorescent tubes, and the green light was stronger here, pooling along the floor like spilled coolant. 3 men in cheap dark robes stood in a loose ring around a shape chalked onto the concrete, and they were chanting badly in Latin they didn't understand. And at the center of the chalk shape the air had begun to thin in the particular way Harry had hoped never to see again, the world being talked out of its objection, a door being argued open. Amateurs, Harry murmured. He's using them as a battery. They don't even know they're the sacrifice. How do you want to play it? Quietly, if they'll let us. They would not let them. The nearest robed man turned, saw 2 figures where there should have been steel and shadow, and screamed a word that flung a gout of sickly fire across the cold room. Natasha was already gone, rolling left behind a rank of hanging carcasses, her pistol speaking twice. Harry simply raised one hand and let the fire arrive and stop, hanging in the air a foot from his palm like a photograph of fire, and then he closed his fingers and it had never been lit. You don't get to do that here, he told him almost kindly, and flicked 2 fingers, and the man's robe became very heavy and very cold and folded him gently to the floor, unconscious before he understood he'd lost. The second man Natasha took with a strike to the throat that dropped him without drama. The third was faster, and frightened men were the dangerous ones, and he wheeled toward the half-open door in the air and shouted into it. Master, they're here, the Potter boy is. Harry crossed the room without appearing to hurry and put his hand flat over the man's mouth. And the silver green ran down his arm, and the man's voice simply stopped existing, the sound unspoken, the message unsent. He lowered the man to the ground and held him there, not ungently, while the panic burned itself out behind his eyes. He can't hear you, Harry said. I closed the line. Look at me, 3 men came in tonight who aren't going home, and you helped, and you didn't even get the part of the bargain you were promised, did you? He never pays, he never has. I'm the only person you're going to meet tonight who's going to tell you the truth, so listen, it's over, you're done, sleep. And he touched 2 fingers to the man's brow, and the man slept. The chalk shape on the floor pulsed once, hungry, and the air at its center tore wider rather than narrower, and Harry understood his mistake a half-second before it arrived. The 3 workers hadn't been the battery. They'd been the kindling. Out of the widening dark came a shape that walked on too many joints, gray and waterlogged and wrong. A thing dragged up out of some drowned place and given a single instruction. An Inferius. He hadn't seen one in years. He had hoped to keep it that way. Behind you, he said, already moving, but Natasha had heard the wet drag of it and was gone sideways, and her rounds punched through the gray flesh and did precisely nothing, because you cannot shoot a thing that is already finished with being alive. Bullets aren't, she started. Fire, Harry said, they hate fire. Stand clear. But the Inferius was faster than its joints suggested, and it came at her low and grasping, and there was a moment when its drowned fingers closed on the strap of her vest and hauled her off her feet toward the cold dark of the open door, toward the place the 3 workers had gone, and Natasha did not scream because screaming was a tell, but Harry felt the small animal certainty go through her, the old maid certainty, the building with the badly translated name. He crossed the room without crossing it, one instant by the chalk edge, the next with his hand around the creature's wrist, and the silver green poured down his arm into the dead thing. And he gave it the only gift he had, which was the thing it had been denied. He let it finish. The Inferius came apart not into ash but into stillness, the gray flesh remembering it was supposed to be at rest, and it released Natasha's vest and folded down into a heap of drowned cloth, and was, at last, only dead. Natasha came back to her feet in one motion, weapon up, scanning, her professionalism nailed back into place over whatever had cracked. What was that? A corpse he gave a job to. Harry stood over the stilled thing. The door in the air shuddered, its kindling spent, its purpose broken. He's not summoning soldiers. He's recycling the dead because the dead are free and this world is full of them and nobody's guarding them. That's the economy he meant. He's going to build an army out of the one resource I'm supposed to be the master of and dare me to stop him by becoming exactly the thing the title says I am. He looked at his own hand where the green still moved. He's very good at this. I keep forgetting how good because I want him to be small. He grabbed me, Natasha said. It wasn't quite a question. She was looking at him with something new in her face, the look of a person recalculating where the exits were and discovering one of them had a man standing in it. I was going through that door and then I wasn't. You were never going through that door, Harry said, not while I was in the room. I want to be very clear about that because I think people have been unclear with you your whole life about which promises were real. He held her gaze. That one's real. Behind him, the door in the air guttered, starved of its battery, and began to close. Harry felt the 3 dead workers as the green light failed, 3 absences finally allowed to be still, and he stood among the hanging steel and held each of them for a breath, the only funeral he could give, and Natasha watched him do it without knowing exactly what she was watching, and somehow that was worse and better at once. Potter, she said quietly, the door. It's closing. He pulled back the moment he heard my name. Harry turned. The dying green caught in his eyes and made them, for a moment, the same color. He's not ready for me, that's the good news. He needed 3 men and a chalk drawing just to crack a window, which means he came through with far less than he had at home, and he spent these 11 months scavenging the same as I spent them hiding. He looked at the 3 sleeping captives. The bad news is he knows exactly where I am now. He's known since the mark. The errands aren't to find me, they're to get strong enough to come. Natasha holstered her weapon. Then we get strong enough first. That, said Harry, is the most sensible thing anyone said to me in this entire universe. The compound kitchen at 2 in the morning was neutral ground, in theory. In practice, it had become, over the last several days, a place where 3 women who did not lose kept arriving at the same hour to not talk about the same man. Natasha was there first, as she generally was, because she didn't sleep on a normal schedule any more than Harry did. And she was eating cold noodles out of the carton and reading the meatpacking plant forensics on a tablet when Wanda came in barefoot in an oversized sweater with her hair down and the faint red afterglow that meant she'd been working her power late and alone. You're up, Wanda observed. So are you. I do not sleep well after I open my mind to someone. Wanda put the kettle on because Wanda's answer to most things was to put the kettle on and leaned against the counter with her arms crossed. It leaves the door propped. I keep feeling things that are not mine. Such as his, Wanda said simply and didn't elaborate, and Natasha understood that there was a great deal of meaning packed into the small word, and felt something cool and precise move through her that she identified, after a moment's honest inventory, as jealousy and disliked and respected, because pretending not to feel a thing was how the made part of her had been built, and she'd promised herself she was done being built. The door slid open, and Carol came in, still in her flight jacket, a protein bar already half gone, and stopped when she saw the 2 of them. And the 3 of them looked at each other across the cold kitchen light with the particular wariness of professionals who have all independently noticed the same trap and are wondering who's going to name it. Oh good, Carol said. A meeting. It's not a meeting, Natasha said. It's 3 of us in a kitchen at 2 a.m. eating sad food and not saying his name. That's a meeting. I've been to better run ones. Carol hopped up to sit on the counter because Carol sat on counters and gestured with the protein bar. Look. I fly fast and I hit hard and I don't do the thing where everybody circles the runway for an hour, so I'm just gonna land it. Potter, we've all clocked it. I clocked it the second I walked in on whatever the 2 of you were doing with the lights off in the training room. Reconnaissance, Wanda said with dignity. Reconnaissance, sure, very tactical. I could feel it from the door and I don't even have the magic gene. Carol pointed the bar at each of them in turn. Here's my read. We've got 2 world-enders inbound, 1 local, 1 cosmic, and the strongest piece on our board is a guy who looks at all 3 of us like we're the only people who have ever made him forget to count something. I don't know what that means, but I know that if we let it turn us into idiots who won't watch each other's backs because we're too busy keeping score, we lose both fights, so I'm putting it on the table. We all see it, now we decide it doesn't get to make us stupid. There was a silence. The kettle began very quietly to sing. That, said Natasha, is the most mature thing I have ever heard you say. I contain multitudes, mostly punching, but multitudes. Carol slid off the counter. I'm not saying I'm not gonna win, by the way. I'm just saying I'll win clean and the world won't end while I do it. She paused at the door and the brass dropped for half a heartbeat and what was under it was younger and less sure. He looks at you 2 like that too. I noticed. Figured you should know I noticed, so nobody thinks they're getting away with anything. She left. Wanda took the kettle off before it could fully cry. Natasha set down the noodles. She is not wrong, Wanda said to the steam, about any of it. Which is the irritating thing about her. She's never wrong about the shape of a fight, Natasha said, only about how much it'll cost. She looked at the door Carol had gone through. We should decide she's right while it's still cheap to decide it. And if we can't, then we'd better win the wars fast, Natasha said, before we find out what we do to each other slow. And she picked the noodles back up, and the two of them stood in the cold kitchen light, not saying his name, which was, they both understood, its own way of saying it constantly. Wanda had asked for the large training room, the one with the reinforced everything, and when Harry arrived she had already cleared the floor and dimmed the lights, and she stood in the center of it with her hands loose at her sides and red light moving along her fingers like a slow tide, and she looked, he thought, less afraid than she had on the observation deck. More like a person standing at the edge of cold water she decided to enter on her own terms. Tony says our magics might find each other across distance, she said. He says if Voldemort can sense you and you can sense me, then perhaps the three of us together can build a net. A way to feel him coming before he writes on the sky again. She turned her palms up, the red brightened. But to build it, you and I have to know what the other one feels like. From the inside, I have never done this with anyone whose power is real. I do not know if it will hurt. It might, Harry said honestly. Not the way a wound hurts, the other way. He came to stand a few feet from her, close enough that the cold of him and the warmth of her met somewhere in the air between them and made a third thing, a faint pressure he felt against his skin. When I open to someone, they feel what I carry. The door, the counting. Most people can't hold it for long. I'd understand if you didn't want to. I have carried things, Wanda said. Her chin came up. I lost a brother. I lost someone I built a whole life with twice, the second time by my own hand, in a way I will not describe because you will look at me differently and I am tired of being looked at differently. Her voice didn't break. It went lower, steadier, the way a thing goes steady when it has decided to stop bleeding in front of company. Do not protect me from your weight, Harry. Everyone protects me. It is its own kind of cage. Show me the real thing. I want to know I am not the only one who walks around full of doors. So he showed her. He reached, not with his hands, and she reached back, and their powers met in the dim air the way two instruments meet when someone tunes them to the same note, a resonance, low and physical, that ran up Harry's spine and made the lights flicker. And then she was inside the edge of him, at the threshold of the room where he kept the dead, and he felt her go still with the enormity of it, the endless soft procession, every leaving he had ever felt and learned to carry, the weight that no one else in this world or the last had been able to share. She did not pull away. That was the thing he would think about for a long time afterward, lying awake in the dark that he didn't sleep in. She did not pull away. She stood at the threshold of the worst room in him, and she wept silently, the red light running down her face like rain on a window, and she said in a voice gone rough, Oh, you have been doing this alone, all of it, for years. It's manageable, Harry said, which was the lie he told himself most often. It is not manageable, it is simply being managed, which is not the same, and you know it is not the same. And then she did something he had not braced for because there was no bracing for it. She opened her own door in return. She showed him the brother, the bright, fast, laughing boy stopped mid-stride. She showed him the man she had loved, the gold mined, the second loss, the thing she had done with the whole of her grief that had nearly unmade a town and several people in it. She showed him the cage of being feared and the worst cage of being handled, and she held nothing back, and the resonance between them sang so high and so clean that the reinforced windows of the training room sang with it, a thin crystalline note, and somewhere down the corridor a door opened and Harry knew without looking who it was. He drew back gently and the resonance faded, and Wanda was standing very close to him with the red light dying on her wet face, and the air between them still held that third thing, that pressure, warmer now. That, she said unsteadily, is the first time in years I have not felt alone inside my own head. For me too, Harry said, and meant it more than he'd meant most things, and behind them in the doorway Carol Danvers stood with her arms crossed and her jaw doing the work jaws do when a person has walked in on something they don't have a category for and have decided on the spot to be loud about it instead. So this is training, Carol said. She'd come straight from the upper atmosphere. There was still a faint corona of cooling gold around her shoulders and frost melting off her flight jacket, and she filled the doorway as she filled most spaces by deciding to. Wanda stepped back from Harry with the unhurried dignity of a woman who refused to be caught at anything, wiping her face with the heel of one hand, and the red light went out of her like a tide going home. It's reconnaissance, Wanda said. We were building a way to sense Voldemort. It requires contact between our powers. Looked real strategic. Carol pushed off the doorframe and prowled into the room, and her eyes went from Wanda to Harry and back, doing arithmetic she clearly resented having to do. I just flew 6 hours of grid out past the Kuiper line because the long-range buoys have been screaming for 2 days and I wanted eyes on it before I scared anybody. You want to know what I found, or is this a bad time? It's not a bad time, Harry said. Could have fooled me. But she came to the center of the room and planted herself, and the brass dropped out of her voice, and what was under it was the thing Harry had learned to listen for in her. The soldier who had seen the dark up close and come back to warn the people who hadn't. There's a front coming, not weather. Something's moving through the outer systems, eating them, not conquering, eating, taking the resources and the population and leaving the rock behind clean. I've fought a lot of bad things, Potter. Empires, gods, the Kree on a bad century. This isn't that, this is methodical. This has a philosophy. She looked at him, and for once she wasn't challenging him, she was bringing him a problem she couldn't punch. Whatever it is, it's coming this direction, slow, sure, like it already knows how the visit ends and it's just enjoying the drive. The room had gone cold, and this time it was nothing Harry was doing. Wanda's hand had found her own sternum again, the gesture from the observation deck, pressing as though to quiet a bell. Does it have a name? Harry asked. The buoys picked up chatter from 3 different dying civilizations before they went quiet, Carol said. 3 languages, no shared roots, they all used the same word. Her mouth thinned. It translates near as the Kree linguistics package can manage to the balance, or the one who balances. They were praying to it, Potter. At the end, they decided the thing killing them was a kind of god, and they were thanking it for choosing them. Nobody said anything for a moment. Harry looked at the two of them, the warmth of Wanda still printed on the air at his left and the gold of Carol still ticking as it cooled at his right, and he thought about Natasha down the hall building a picture out of 3 sleeping prisoners, and he thought that the universe had a low and tasteless sense of timing. To put 2 enormous things in his sky in the same week, and then arrange for the 3 most formidable people he'd met in 2 worlds to be standing close enough that he could feel the heat coming off one of them and the chill off the other. All right, he said. 2 problems, one in the sky to the north and one in the sky everywhere else. We don't get to choose them one at a time. We never do, Carol said, and there was the grin again, fierce, glad to have something her size at last. So which one do you want to hit first? And that was when the cold that was Voldemort's came again into the room, into all of their heads at once, soft and patient and amused, and the lights died entirely, and a voice that was not in the air said, "Neither, I think. You'll be too busy with me." The darkness pressed close. Wanda's hands flared red, Carol's fists lit gold, and the 2 lights threw the room into a strobing war of color. And in the center of it Harry stood very still and let the green rise behind his eyes and did not light it, not yet, because lighting it was what Tom wanted, was the proof that the errand running had worked, that the wizard who owned death could still be frightened in the dark. "Hello, Tom," Harry said to the room, to the cold, to the patient awful attention pressing in from 30 miles of dark hills. "You've been busy, 3 men in a meatpacking plant. That's not the budget you used to work with." "I am economizing." The voice was almost fond, the way an old teacher is fond of the student who finally understands the lesson. "You taught me economy, Harry, you and your stubborn refusal to die on schedule. I have learned to spend carefully and to want only one thing at a time." A pause, soft as snowfall. "This world is going to be mine. It has no defenses against what I am, no laws, no ministry, no old families who remember the words. It is a garden that has never been walked through by anyone who knows what gardens are for, and you are going to watch me take it, the way you watched everyone else die, because that is the only thing you have ever truly been good at. Watching." The green came up behind Harry's eyes whether he willed it or not, and the temperature in the room dropped past anything Voldemort was doing, and Wanda made a small sound and Carol's gold flared brighter to push back the dark, and Harry understood that the words had found the door he kept shut and leaned on it, just slightly, the way they were built to. "You always did talk too much," Harry said, and his voice came out level because level was a discipline and he had decided long ago that Tom Riddle would never again hear it shake. "It's the loneliness. I know the feeling. The difference between us is that I have people in this room who walked into the dark with me instead of running, and you have 3 frightened men asleep on a freezer floor who you were going to spend like coins." He let the green flood the room then, silver bright, and the cold that was Voldemort's recoiled from it the way a hand recoils from a stove. "Come and take the garden, Tom. Bring everything you've scavenged. I'll be the thing in it that remembers what gardens are for." The cold withdrew. The lights flickered back. The voice going left one last sentence behind it, and Harry heard the truth under the menace, which was the part that kept him standing in the restored light long after the others had relaxed. "You misunderstand me, Harry," said Voldemort, almost gentle, almost gone. "I do not need to beat you. I only need to be busy enough that you do not look up at the larger thing in time. We have, you and I, the same excellent taste in distractions." Then he was gone, and the room was only a room, and three women turned to look at Harry at once, and he stood in the middle of their three kinds of light and did not, for a moment, say anything at all. The overhead lights steadied. The cold drained out of the corners. Down the corridor, an alarm Tony had built began to chirp, late and indignant, registering a subtraction event that had already finished and left. "Tell me everyone got that," Tony's voice said over the room speakers, thin with the effort of pretending he wasn't shaken. "Tell me I didn't just hear a dead British man threaten my house through the HVAC." "You heard it," Harry said. "Cool, cool, cool, cool. I'm adding him to the threat board. He's getting a magnet." A pause. "Are the three scariest people in the building okay? Blink twice." Carol laughed, short and real, and the gold went out of her fists. Wanda lowered her hands, and the red bled back into her like a held breath let go. And she was looking at Harry with the careful attention of someone who had been inside the room he kept shut, and now understood exactly which words had leaned on which door. Natasha came through the doorway with her weapon already holstered, having heard enough from the hall to know the shooting part was over and the harder part wasn't. "He told you the plan," she said. It wasn't a question. She'd been listening. She was always listening. "Stay busy enough with him that you don't look up at the bigger thing in time." "He told me the plan," Harry agreed. "Which means it isn't the plan, because Tom doesn't give away the real one, but the lie is close enough to true to be useful. He wants me split. Local fire in one hand, cosmic flood in the other, and me running between them until I drop something." He looked at the three of them, ranged around him in the steadying light, and the loneliness he'd carried up to that observation deck the night before had a different shape now, because the room was not empty and the door he kept shut was not any longer the only thing anyone in the building knew about him. "So we don't let me be split. We don't fight his war and the cosmic one as two wars. We treat them as one problem with two faces, and we refuse to be surprised by either." "That's a strategy," Carol said. "I like a strategy. Beats standing in a dark room getting monologued at." "It is also," Wanda said quietly, "the first time I have heard you say we and mean a number larger than the one in your head." Harry looked at her. Whatever passed between them didn't need translating, and he didn't try to translate it. "I'm learning," he said, slowly. "I had bad teachers." He turned for the door, and the three of them fell in around him without being asked, without arranging it, three different powers settling into a formation none of them had drilled. And somewhere under the gravity of two world endings, Harry registered the fact and chose, deliberately, to let himself have it. "Briefing in 10, he said. "Steve needs to hear all of it, the snake and the storm both, and somebody should make real coffee. We're going to be up for a while." "I'll make it," Natasha said. "I know how you like it. A beat. You don't drink it, you hold it, but I'll make it anyway." And she went ahead of them down the corridor, and Carol fell in on Harry's right and Wanda on his left, and the four of them walked toward the light of the command level, while behind them, 30 miles north over the dark hills, a patient cold thing waited and counted and was, for the moment, content to wait. Chapter 2 and Chapter 3, 3 Sparks. Carol Danvers had been to the edge of the solar system more times than she'd been to the dentist, and she liked it out there better, which she suspected said something unflattering about her relationship with Floss. "You're quiet," she said. Beside her, suspended in the hard black silence past the orbit of Neptune, Harry Potter floated with his hands in the pockets of a coat that had no business keeping a man warm in vacuum and was apparently doing it anyway. He didn't have a suit. He didn't have a helmet. He breathed when he remembered to, out of habit rather than necessity, and the silver green moved over his skin like a second atmosphere he'd brought from home. It should have unsettled her. Almost everything unsettled her out here, where the smallness of a person was a measurable quantity. He didn't. "I'm listening," he said. His voice arrived in her head, not her ears, carried on whatever he did instead of sound. "There's a noise out here. Underneath the quiet, you hear it. I hear a lot of things out here. You learn to ignore most of them or you go nuts. Don't ignore this one." He turned slow in the dark. Ahead of them, where the buoys had screamed and then gone silent, a derelict hung against the stars, a Kree long-range relay by the shape of it, except that the shape was wrong in the specific way Carol had learned to dread, threaded through with a green that no honest reactor made. "He got out here before us. Voldemort, he's been busy further from home than I gave him credit for. That's a Kree station." Carol drifted closer, light gathering at her fists out of pure reflex. They mothballed this line a decade ago. Nobody's supposed to be." The station opened its eyes. That was the only way she could describe it afterward in the debrief, to a room of people who hadn't been there. The derelict came alive all at once, running lights flaring that sick green, and the docking arms unfolded the wrong number of times. And out of the open bays came things that had been Kree drones, and were now something Voldemort had reached across the dark and convinced to be his. They moved like the Inferius in Natasha's report, Harry had said, recycled, repurposed, given a single instruction. Except these had engines. Okay, Carol said, and the grin came, because the grin always came when the talking stopped and the doing started. Now we're talking. Try to keep up, wizard. She went in. There was a thing Carol did that no one had ever been able to teach her, and she had never been able to teach anyone, which was to stop being a person and start being a vector. She picked the densest knot of drones and became a line drawn through it, light trailing off her like a comet's hair, and the drones she touched stopped being machines and started being debris. She banked, killed her velocity against nothing, reversed, came back through the cloud from the other side. It was the most herself she ever got to be. Up here there was nobody to break, no city to drop, no parking deck to fall through. Just her and the speed and the math of it. And then she clocked Harry off her left wing and the math changed. He didn't fly as she did. He didn't fly at all, really. He simply decided where he was, and then he was there, the dark folding around him without complaint, and where she carved through the drone cloud he walked through it unhurried, and the drones he passed didn't explode or scatter. They stopped. The green that animated them met the green that was his and recognized a senior authority and went out, and the dead Kree machines remembered they were dead and drifted, still, into the dark. He cleared a third of the cloud in the time it took her to cross it once, and he did it without ever once moving fast. Show off, she said in his head where the words went out here. Says the comet. There was a thread of something warm in it, an answering charge she felt in her teeth. You're enjoying this. Course I'm enjoying this, look at it. She torched a drone that had gotten clever about her blind side, spun, and found him drifting in the center of the thinning cloud with that maddening lack of urgency. This is the only place I'm ever the slow one, you know that. Out here, with you. Everywhere else I'm the fastest thing in the room, and it's lonely as hell. Up here I've got someone to lose to, don't let it go to your head. I would never, you absolutely would. But she was laughing, in the place where laughing happened up here. And for a moment the two of them hung in the wreckage of a dead man's experiment with the whole indifferent galaxy wheeling around them. And Carol Danvers, who had been rebuilt from the photons up and had decided somewhere in the rebuilding that she would never again let anyone close enough to cost her something, felt the decision develop a hairline crack. A second wave came out of the derelict's lower bays, faster than the first, and these were not the slow drone husks. These had been Kree interceptors once, sleek and built for murder, and the green that drove them now made them tireless on top of deadly. They came at the two of them in a coordinated net, a dozen vectors converging, the kind of attack that had once put Carol through a parking deck. Left side's yours, Carol called, and didn't wait to see if he agreed, because waiting was for people who didn't trust their wingman, and somewhere in the last 10 minutes she'd stopped not trusting hers. She took the right half of the net at a speed that turned 6 interceptors into a single expanding cloud of debris, banked hard around a frozen moon of wreckage, and came back to find the left half already drifting dead, the green gone out of them, Harry hanging in the middle of the kill with his hands in his pockets like a man waiting for a bus. You didn't even move, she accused. I moved the part of the universe that mattered. He turned, unbothered, as the last interceptor died of having been told it was already dead. You're keeping score, you always keep score, how am I doing? You're up 2. I'm gonna allow it because you're new. She killed her velocity against nothing and drifted alongside him, and the hard black silence wrapped the two of them, and for a moment there was just the wreckage and the stars and the strange specific comfort of fighting beside someone who didn't need protecting. You know what the worst part of being the fastest thing alive is? It's that every fight is just you and a stopwatch. Nobody's ever in it with me. They're all behind me, catching up, watching the replay. She nodded at the dead interceptors, at the work they'd done together without a word of coordination. That was the first dogfight I've had in years where I wasn't alone in it. Don't make it weird, I'm just stating an operational fact. I'd never make it weird, Harry said. I'll just quietly enjoy being 2 ahead. Okay, see, that's weird, that's you making it weird. But she was grinning in the place where grinning happened out here, and the charge that ran between them in vacuum had nothing to do with the cold. And Carol Danvers, who had decided somewhere in the dark of her remaking that she would never again let anyone close enough to cost her something, felt the decision develop alongside its hairline crack an actual fault line. The station's core lit. That was the part she'd remember as the moment the day turned. The green deepened, gathered, and a voice came through it, not the cold patient one from the compound. A different register, vast and slow and amused in a way that made the drones look like a child's toys left out in a yard. 2 of them, the voice said, and it was not Voldemort, and the bottom dropped out of the dark. The Deathwalker and the Broken Star, he sends me appetizers. Carol's light flared white-hot on instinct. Every alarm she had screaming the way they'd screamed past the Kuiper line. Potter, she said. Potter, that's not no, Harry said. He'd gone very still, and the warmth was gone out of his voice, replaced by the level discipline she'd only heard him use when the stakes had teeth. That's the other thing, the bigger thing. Carol, that's the one your dying civilizations were praying to. The station's core spat a lance of green-black light, and it was aimed not at Carol but at Harry, and it was fast, faster than the drones, faster than anything that size should move, and Carol did the thing she did, the thing that was the whole point of her, the thing Harry had told her she never needed to do because he could decline any hit. She put herself in front of it. She took the lance across her crossed forearms and it drove her backward through 100 meters of vacuum, and it hurt in a way she hadn't hurt since the Kree had remade her, a deep wrong cold that wasn't heat or force but something that wanted to talk her cells out of believing in themselves. She held it, she always held it, that was the deal she'd made with the universe, she would be the thing that held. And then Harry was there, between her and the core, one hand raised, and the lance simply ended, not deflected, ended, unfired, the way the fire in the meatpacking plant had never been lit, and the green-black light that had been eating at her arms forgot its instructions and let go. You took the hit, Harry said. He wasn't looking at the station. He was looking at her, at the frost of damage healing slow on her forearms, and there was something in his face she didn't have a name for and refused to learn one. I told you that you'd never need to, and I told you that's the job. She flexed her fingers, watched the gold flood back into them, and grinned at him through the residual ache because grinning was load-bearing. You don't get to be the only one who stands in front of things, Potter. That's not a you thing, that's an us thing. Get used to it. She nodded at the station, at the patient vast amusement still humming in its corrupted core. Now, you want to tell me how a cosmic death god and your pet British nightmare are sending each other postcards? Because that's the part that's gonna ruin my week. That, said Harry, and the silver-green rose around him until the dead station's green looked like a candle next to sunrise, is exactly the part. Voldemort didn't get strong enough to come for me on his own. He found a bigger fish, and he made a deal, and the bigger fish is using him as a doorman. He raised his hand toward the station's core. Let's not leave the door open. He closed his fingers, and the Kree relay that a dead man had stolen and a death god had borrowed ceased all at once, to ever have been corrupted at all, the green draining out of it, the drones going truly still. The core's vast amused attention cut off mid-syllable, and the two of them hung alone again in the clean dark past Neptune. And Carol looked at the man who could do that without raising his voice and understood, with the part of her that had been to the edge and back, that she had finally found something out here bigger than the loneliness. For the record, she said, I still would have gotten there. I know, Harry said, that's what worries me about you. The Deathrealm pocket opened in Pittsburgh of all places, in the basement of a foreclosed Steel Baron's mansion that Voldemort's earthbound followers had been using as a chapter house. And Wanda Maximoff went down into it because she was the only one besides Harry who could stand to. You don't have to come, Harry said at the top of the stairs. The cold came up out of the dark below them, his kind of cold, the cellar deeper than a hall cold. I mean it, Wanda, this isn't a fight. There's nothing to hit down there. It's a wound in the world that he tore to harvest the dead, and walking into it is going to feel like walking into the worst day of your life and being asked to stay. Then you should not go alone, Wanda said. You have done everything alone. I watched you do it from the inside, and I will not stand at the top of the stairs while you do it again. She took the first step. The cold closed over her ankles like water. Besides, I am the only one of us who has lived in a wound in the world. I built one once. I know the architecture. He didn't argue. That was a thing she'd come to value about him in the short, strange span she'd known the true size of him. He didn't perform protectiveness as a way of keeping people small. He believed her when she told him what she could carry. So they went down together into the dark, and the dark resolved into a place that was not a basement. It was Sokovia. Not the real Sokovia, which was rubble and memory, but the Sokovia of the worst day, rebuilt out of the stuff that death realms were made of, which was the residue of grief that the living couldn't put down. The street where she'd lived, the light the color of an old bruise. And ahead of her, walking bright and fast and laughing over his shoulder as he always had in the half-second before, her brother. Pietro, she said, and her voice came out very young. It's not him, Harry said quietly at her side. You know it's not him, the place is using him. It reaches into you, and it finds the shape that will make you stop walking, and it wears that shape, because a thing that stopped walking is a thing it can keep. He didn't take her arm, he didn't pull her back. He stood beside her in the bruise-colored light and let her look at her brother's borrowed face. But knowing it's not him doesn't make it hurt less. I won't insult you by pretending it does. Can you? The word stuck. She made it come anyway because she had decided she was done leaving the worst sentences unsaid. You are the master of death. You could call him, the real one. You have a stone that calls the dead, you told Natasha. I felt you tell her. You could bring him back to me for a moment, for longer. Harry was silent. The false Pietro turned and smiled and beckoned, and the death realm leaned in close to hear his answer, because his answer was the whole reason it had built this street. Yes, Harry said. I could. The single word hung in the bruised air. Wanda's hands had filled with red without her deciding it, and the red wanted. Oh, it wanted. It strained toward the bright laughing shape at the end of the street with the whole weight of every night she'd spent learning to live in a world he wasn't in. But I'm not going to, Harry went on, and he said it gently, and he said it like a man closing a door he hated to close. And I'm going to tell you why, because you deserve the why and not just the number what the stone calls back isn't them. It's near enough to break your heart and far enough to break your mind, and it knows it doesn't belong among the living, and it suffers, and you suffer watching it suffer, and the only mercy in the whole arrangement is letting it go again, which means burying him twice. He turned to face her, and the silver green in him banked low, made small on purpose so it wouldn't fight the red. I have done it, once, to someone I love. I called him back because I couldn't bear it, and I watched what it cost him to be here wrong, and I have carried that on top of everything else I carry. I will not hand you that weight to make this moment easier. Not even if you beg me, especially not if you beg me. You've been handed enough weights by people who said it was love. The red light shook in her hands. The false Pietro beckoned, and his smile began to fray at the edges as the death realm sensed the answer slipping. Then what do I do? Wanda said, and her voice cracked clean down the middle with all of it. If I cannot have him back and I cannot put it down, what do I do with the love, Harry? Where does it go? It doesn't go anywhere, Harry said. That's the secret nobody tells you because it's a terrible secret. It doesn't go anywhere and it doesn't get smaller. You just get bigger around it. You build more room. That's all grief is in the end, the slow work of getting big enough to hold what you're not allowed to set down. He held out his hand, not toward the false Pietro, toward her, palm up, the way he'd offered to check for rain over wrecked Manhattan Avenue. I can't bring him back. But I can show you how I carry mine so you stop thinking you have to carry yours alone in the dark. That I can do. That I'd be honored to do. And Wanda Maximoff, who had been offered every kind of false comfort by every kind of liar, looked at the one man who had told her the true and terrible thing instead, and let the red light go out of her hands and took his. The false Pietro stopped beckoning. The death realm, denied the thing it had built the street to take, began to come apart, the bruised light thinning, the street unmaking itself back into the basement it had pretended not to be. And in the last moment before it dissolved, the bright laughing shape at the end of the road did something the death realm hadn't scripted, something Wanda would never be entirely sure she hadn't imagined. It stopped laughing and looked at her, and at the man holding her hand, and it nodded once, the way her brother used to nod when he approved of a thing and was too proud to say so. Then it was gone, and the basement was only a basement, and Wanda was standing in the dark holding Harry's hand and breathing like a person who had set something down and discovered she could stand up straighter without it. Thank you, she said, for the number. That's the strangest thank you have ever received, Harry said, and I think it might be the best one. Voldemort's earthly stronghold turned out to be a decommissioned Hydra black site in the Adirondacks, which Natasha found almost funny because she had personally helped burn that particular organization down to the studs, and here was a dead wizard squatting in the ashes like a crab in a borrowed shell. He's nothing if not thrifty, she murmured. She lay flat on a ridgeline above the compound with Harry beside her, the two of them under a stand of pines in the blue hour before dawn, and she was running the place through a monocular while he ran it through whatever he used instead of eyes. 40-some heat signatures. Most of them clustered, which means they sleep in a barracks, which means they're soldiers, not believers. Believers spread out, they want their own altars. There are 11 dead in there, Harry said. She lowered the monocular. He said it as he said all of it now, level and quiet, a man reading a temperature. She'd stopped asking how he knew. Captives? Number they've been dead a while. He's keeping them. A muscle moved in his jaw and went still. Inventory, the way you keep ammunition. He's learned that the dead are the one resource this world doesn't guard, and he's stockpiling, and when he has enough he'll wake them all at once and walk them out the front gate, and there won't be a thing your Avengers know how to do about an army that's already finished with being alive. There's a thing you know how to do about it. There's a thing I know how to do about it, he agreed. And doing it is exactly what the bigger fish wants, because every time I master that much death at once I'm a little more the title and a little less the person. And the death god out past Neptune would like nothing better than for me to spend myself hollow fighting his doorman. He turned his head and looked at her in the pre-dawn dark, and the green in him was banked all the way down, just a man on a cold ridge. So we're not going to do it the loud way, we're going to do it your way, quiet. We go in, we find the dead, I lay them to rest one at a time so it costs me almost nothing, and we leave before the barracks knows the lights flickered. No army, no spectacle, no feast for the thing watching. Natasha looked at him for a moment. You planned a whole operation around not using your power. I planned a whole operation around using the right power. Yours, he almost smiled. I've spent 11 months being the answer to every problem by being bigger than it. You're the first person who's made me want to be the right size instead of the largest one. That's a rarer skill than mine, Romanoff. I'd trade you straight across for it some days. She didn't have a procedure for that either. She was beginning to suspect she was going to have to build a great many new procedures. Stay on my line, she said instead of anything true. Do what I do. If I stop, you stop. If I touch the back of my neck, you make us both not there for as long as you can and we wait. Can you do not there? I can do not there beautifully. Then let's go ruin a dead man's filing system. They went down through the tree line and through the fence, Harry convinced a 6-foot section of chain link that it had never been a barrier. And they stepped through the place where it stopped objecting and into the black site, and it was the cleanest infiltration of Natasha's career, which was saying a great deal, because she had infiltrated places that no longer appeared on maps because she had been there. She moved and he moved with her, matching her exactly, a man twice as powerful as anything in the building, making himself precisely as small as the building required. They passed a sentry in a corridor and Harry touched the air and the sentry's eyes slid over the place where they stood and found nothing worth reporting. They found the room with the dead. It was a cold storage chamber, 11 figures laid out under sheets with the awful neatness of a man who thought of corpses as stock. Natasha covered the door. Harry went to them one at a time and he knelt by each and he put 2 fingers to where a brow would be under the sheet, and the silver green ran down his arm so faint she could barely see it. And one by one the 11 absences in the room became 11 stillnesses, the difference invisible to anyone who hadn't learned in the last weeks to read the man doing it. He held each for a breath, the only funeral. She watched him give 11 strangers the only dignity left to them, in the dark, with no one to witness it but a woman who had been built to feel nothing and was discovering at the worst possible time that the building had failed. That's all of them, he breathed, at the 11th. He stood and swayed just slightly, and she had a hand under his elbow before she decided to, and he let her, which told her how much even the quiet way had cost. He'll know by morning that his inventory's gone. He won't know how or who because we never woke the building. He'll just find his ammunition turned back into people who get to rest. He looked at her in the dark, and the thing in his face was the thing from the ridge, the thing she kept refusing to name. Thank you. I'd have done it the loud way alone, the way I do everything, and it would have cost me a piece I don't get back. You saved me from myself with a monocular and a hand signal. Nobody's done that in a long time. Don't make it a thing, Natasha said, which was what she said when something was already a thing. Wouldn't dream of it, Harry said, which was what he said when he was going to anyway. They went out the way they'd come, through the fence that forgot to be a fence, up the ridge in the first gray light. And at the tree line Natasha stopped and looked back at the black site sleeping its ignorant sleep. And she felt the old maid part of her, the quiet weaponized part, take careful inventory of the morning and report back a finding it had never filed before, which was that she had gone into the dark with someone and come out feeling more like a person than when she'd gone in. She turned that over. She didn't like how much she liked it. She added it with the rest to the long, quiet ledger she kept of Harry Potter, and she noticed that the ledger had stopped being a record of a threat and started, somewhere in the last 2 weeks, being something she didn't have the courage yet to label. Coffee, she said as they climbed toward the Quinjet. When we're back, I'll make it, you'll hold it. It's becoming our whole relationship, Harry observed. It's becoming a lot of things, Natasha said before she could stop herself, and then was furious, and then watched him decline to make her pay for it, which was, by now, the most dangerous thing about him. The thing about 3 women who do not lose all arriving at the same conclusion at the same time is that the room they share gets very crowded with everything they aren't saying. It came to a head in the common room the next evening, which was nobody's fault and everybody's, the way these things are. Carol was sprawled on the structurally unsound couch with her boots up, narrating the Neptune operation to Sam and Rhodey with the specific embellishments that made her a menace at parties. Wanda was in the window seat with a book she wasn't reading. Natasha was at the counter with the good coffee, 2 cups, one of which she had not yet decided whether to deliver. And Harry was in the doorway, having just come from a long session with Tony about the early warning net. And the moment he appeared, all 3 of them registered it, and all 3 of them pretended not to, and the pretending was so loud that Sam stopped mid-sentence and looked around like a man who'd heard a smoke alarm. I'm gonna, Sam said. Rhodey, you want to? Yep, said Rhodey, who had survived several wars by knowing when to leave a room. They left the room. The 4 of them were alone, and the everything unsaid took up all the available air. It was Carol who landed it, because Carol always landed it. She swung her boots off the couch and sat up and looked at the other 2 women with the flat, fair attention of a fighter calling a thing in the open. Okay, we doing this. Because I flew 6 hours of grid and took a death god's lance across the arms for him this week, and Maximoff went down into her own worst day with him, and Romanoff, you spent a whole night in the dark not waking up a building, and we are all sitting here being so normal about it that I'm getting a rash. She spread her hands. I'm not built for circling, so I'll say the thing. We all want the same impossible idiot there. It's on the table. Somebody pick it up or I'm gonna keep talking and it'll get worse. The silence had weight. Harry in the doorway had gone very still with the carefulness of a man who has realized he is the subject and not a participant. "I don't," he started. "Nope," Carol said, not unkindly. "This part's ours. You'll get a turn. Sit down." He sat down. "She's right," Wanda said to the window, and then made herself turn from it because she had decided she was done leaving the worst sentences unsaid, and this was one of them. "I have spent years being careful with what I feel because what I feel reshapes rooms when I am not careful, and I have not been careful about him, and I noticed, and I let it happen anyway, which I do not do." She looked at the other two. "And I felt you both. In the kitchen, I am sorry. I do not mean to, but I am inside the edges of him now, and the edges of him have you two written all over them, and pretending otherwise is a lie I am too tired to keep telling." Natasha set down the coffee cups, both of them. She came around the counter and leaned against it and crossed her arms, and when she spoke it was in the level, even voice she used for true things she'd rather not say. "I was made to be the most useful person in any room. To read what people want and become the lever that moves them. I have never once in my entire life wanted something for myself badly enough that it made me bad at my job. A beat. I made him coffee twice this week that he doesn't drink. I'm bad at my job, so yes, it's on the table." For a moment nobody said anything, and the three of them looked at one another across the wreckage of their professional composure, and Harry sat in the chair he'd been ordered into and had the great good sense to keep his mouth shut. "So here's the math," Carol said, and stood because she thought better standing. "We could fight about it. Burn the whole thing down keeping score, lose both wars while we're at it, and somebody flies off into space at the end feeling righteous and alone, and I would know that's my move, I've done it, it's overrated." She paced. "Or we could be the three smartest, scariest, most decorated people on this team and decide like adults that the man gets a say, and that whatever this turns into, it doesn't turn into the thing that gets people killed because we couldn't stand to share a win." She stopped. "I hate sharing, for the record. I want that minuted. But I hate losing more, and I really hate the idea of one of you flying off alone, because I've seen where that road goes and there's nothing at the end of it but you and the dark and a real good view of everything you didn't say." Wanda was looking at her with something that had started as wariness and become, somewhere in the speech, respect. "That is twice now you have been wise. I am revising my entire opinion of you. Don't, it's exhausting up here, I'm going back to punching things soon." But Carol was almost smiling, and the three of them stood in the common room with the thing finally on the table, and it was Natasha in the end who turned to Harry. "You've been very patient," she said, "and very quiet, which I'm choosing to read as wisdom and not cowardice. So you get your turn now. Say something true. We'll know if it isn't." Harry looked at the three of them, the brash one with the cracked decision and the death god's frost still healing on her arms. The soulful one who'd walked into her own worst day rather than let him do it alone. The sharp one who'd made him coffee she knew he wouldn't drink. 3 kinds of power and 3 kinds of woman, none of them his to keep, and all of them somehow standing in the same room having decided not to destroy each other over a man who had spent 11 months certain he would be alone for whatever was left of his very long life. "I've spent a long time," he said slowly, "being the strongest thing in every room and the loneliest." Those felt like the same fact. The price of one was the other. That was the deal I thought I'd signed. He turned the worn black stone over once in his fingers and put it away. "I don't know what this is. I won't pretend I do or make any of you a promise I haven't earned the right to make. But I know that this week 3 different people walked into the dark with me instead of letting me go alone, and not one of you made me smaller to do it, and I've never had that. Not once. Not in either world." He looked at each of them in turn. "So I'm not going to be wise about it the way Carol's being wise. I'm going to be honest, which is harder. I want all 3 of you in my life. I don't fully understand the shape of that, and I'm not going to insult you by forcing one. But I'm done pretending the want isn't there to keep the loneliness tidy. It's there, you're all on my table too." There was a silence, and then Carol exhaled and dropped back onto the structurally unsound couch and put her boots back up. "Well," she said, "that was annoyingly well said. I was hoping he'd fumble it and make this easy." "He never fumbles," Wanda said, and there was warmth in it now, unguarded. "It is the worst thing about him." "Coffee's getting cold," Natasha said, and picked up the 2 cups, and after a moment's deliberation she made a third and carried all 3 across the room, and the 4 of them sat together in the lamplight with the wars temporarily outside the windows where they belonged, and for a little while nobody counted anything at all. It didn't last, because it never did. The cold came at the edge of midnight, but it was the wrong cold, not Voldemort's cellar chill and not Harry's deep silver green, but a third temperature, vast and patient and somehow courteous, the cold of a thing so large that cruelty would be beneath it. The lamps didn't flicker. They dimmed all at once with terrible politeness, and on the dark glass of the common room windows a face assembled itself out of the night, and it was not a face Harry knew, and that was what brought him to his feet faster than the snake ever had. It was carved and patient and old past the point of caring, and when it spoke its voice filled the room without raising itself, the way deep water fills a hull. "Master of Death," it said. "The little wizard told me what you were, and I confess I did not believe him. There are no masters of death. There is only death and the mercy of administering it well." The face regarded the four of them, and its attention settled, last and longest, on Harry. "I am called many things by the dying. You may call me the one who balances. I have crossed a great deal of dark to reach this small green world, and I find it overfull, too many lives, too few resources, the old imbalance that ends every garden left untended. I will correct it, as I have corrected 1,000 worlds." The wizard asked to keep this one as his reward for distracting you. I have agreed. He may rule the half I leave. "Thanos!" Carol was on her feet, gold flooding her fists, and her voice had gone tight in a way Harry had not heard from her even past Neptune. "You're a long way from the stories, big guy. We heard you went quiet." "I went thorough," said the face. "It takes time to balance correctly. Haste is how amateurs leave survivors." The carved eyes returned to Harry. "I have watched you these 2 weeks, Deathwalker. You unmake my Dorman's toys without effort. You closed a corruption I spent a year seeding, as a man closes a window against a draft. You are the only thing on this world that could inconvenience me, and so I have made you a study, and I have learned the shape of your weakness, and it is the same weakness every great power carries." The face turned slow and looked at the 3 women ranged around him, at Carol's fists and Wanda's waking red and Natasha's hand drifting to her hip. "You have started to love. How convenient, how human. I will not have to hunt for the lever. You have set it on the table yourselves." The red in Wanda's hands roared up, and the windows sang, and Harry put out one hand, not toward the face, toward her, a request, not a command, and she held, shaking, the fury banked but not gone. "You've made a study of me," Harry said, and his voice came out level, and the silver green rose behind his eyes until the polite cold on the glass began very slightly to draw back. "Then you'll have noticed I don't make threats. I make certainties. So here's one. You've crossed a great deal of dark to balance a world that didn't ask you to, and you've allied with a man I've already killed once. And you've just told 3 of the most dangerous people alive that you intend to use them against me." He stepped forward, and the cold drew further back, and the face on the glass held its courteous patience like a mask that had begun, at one corner, to slip. "You think love is a lever. Everyone who's tried to use it on me thought the same thing. They're all in the room I keep, Thanos, every single one. I felt each of them leave." He let the green flood the windows, and the carved face guttered like a candle in a draft. "You want to balance this garden? Come and do it yourself. Stop sending doormen. I'll be the thing in it that remembers what gardens are for, and I'll be standing with 3 people who decided tonight in front of me that they're done being used as anyone's lever. Including yours." The face held a moment longer, and then it did the worst thing it could have done, which was to smile, slow and vast and entirely unbothered. "Yes," said Thanos. "You will be standing with them. I am counting on it." The lamps came back. The glass was only glass, and the 4 of them stood in the restored light of the common room, the wars no longer outside the windows where they belonged, and Harry looked at the 3 women who had just been named, to their faces, as the weapon a death god intended to use to break him, and found that the loneliness he carried for 11 months had been replaced by something far more frightening, which was that now at last he had a great deal to lose. Chapter 3 and Chapter 4, The Snake and the Storm. Voldemort came at dawn, because dawn was when the human animal slept hardest, and because he had always had a poet's weakness for endings dressed up as beginnings. He did not come quietly. That was the first surprise, and Harry understood its meaning before the alarms finished waking the compound. The quiet phase was over. The scavenging, the errands, the inventory in the cold rooms, all of that had been a man economizing while he gathered. The thing that crossed the northern hills as the sky went gray was a man who had decided he had gathered enough, and it announced itself with a wall of green fire 2 miles wide that turned the dawn the color of a wound and came on without slowing. "Contact," Steve's voice over every comm in the building. "Already comm, already the door. Northfield mass formation, and I do mean mass." Potter eyes. Harry was on the observation deck before the sentence finished, and what he saw stopped even him for a moment, which was its own kind of intelligence gathering, because very little stopped him now. They came out of the green fire in ranks, the dead. Not the 11 he'd laid to rest in the Adirondacks. Those were gone past Voldemort's reach. The others. The thousands of others a patient, thrifty man had harvested across 11 months from a world that didn't guard its dead, woken all at once and walked south in a tide that made the Manhattan swarm look like a rehearsal. In ferry by the Legion, gray and tireless and already finished with fear. And above them, riding the green fire the way a captain rides a deck, a tall pale figure with no nose and red eyes and a wand like a splinter of bone. "Okay," said Tony, suiting up midair as he came. "I'm gonna need everybody to be very brave and a little bit insane, because I'm counting somewhere north of 4,000 hostiles, and they are all, and I want to stress this, already dead, which is usually the part where I relax. They don't tire, Harry said. They don't fear, they don't break when their line breaks. Fire stops them. Cold stops them. Force scatters them but doesn't kill them because they're past killing. He was already moving down the stairs, the silver green waking all the way up his arms, and the three women fell in around him out of the dawn dark of the corridor. Carol with the gold roaring off her shoulders, Wanda with the red climbing her wrists, Natasha with 2 pistols and the flat clear calm she wore into things that frightened lesser people. He's not trying to win the field. Listen to me, all of you, because this is the whole battle. He doesn't care about the dead. They're a curtain. He wants me to do the obvious thing. He wants me to stand in the middle of that field and master all 4,000 of them at once. The way I can, the way I want to, because that's the spectacle the bigger fish ordered. The second I spend myself that hollow, I'm no use against Thanos, and Tom gets to keep his half of the garden. He hit the ground floor and the great doors opened ahead of him onto the gray field and the oncoming tide. So I'm not going to do the obvious thing. We're going to hold the line the hard way, the human way, and I'm going to save myself for him. That's a lot of dead people to hold the human way, Carol said. I know. I love it. Let's go. They went. The field became a thing Natasha would never fully describe to anyone who hadn't stood in it. The Inferi came on in a gray flood, and the Avengers met them at the compound's threshold, and the threshold held because Steve decided it would. He planted himself at the center of the line with the shield, and Thor came down beside him in a column of lightning that turned 100 of the dead to ash and char, and Sam and Rhodey worked the air, raining fire down the throat of the advance, and for the first few minutes it was almost possible to believe the line would hold itself. Then the numbers told, the way numbers always told. They're flanking east, Natasha called because she'd seen it the half-second before it became a problem. The gray tide pouring around the burned ground Thor had made, indifferent to its own losses because loss meant nothing to it. Wanda east now, and here was the friction, the thing Harry had known would come and had not been able to drill out of them in 2 weeks, because you cannot drill out of 3 apex predators the lifetime habit of being the one who decides. Wanda went east. So did Carol on the same instinct, and the two of them arrived at the same breach with 2 enormous powers and no agreement about whose it was. And for 1 bad second the red and the gold tangled in the air, each reflexively making room the way you make room for a thing you don't trust to stay in its lane, and in that second of accommodation the dead poured through the gap they'd left. That's mine, Carol started. I had it. You're both wrong, Natasha snapped in the cold even command voice that cut through both of them because it expected to be obeyed. You're treating it like it's one of you. It's both of you. Carol, high, burn the front rank and drive them down. Wanda, low, when they're packed, crush the ground out from under them. You're not sharing the breach, you're a hammer and an anvil, now move. And it worked because it was true. Because Carol went high and torched the leading edge into a wall of flame that drove the dead to ground, and Wanda reached into the earth beneath them and folded it. And 400 Inferi went down into a pit that closed over them like a mouth. And the breach sealed. And the 2 women came out of it with the specific wild grin of people who have just discovered they are better together than apart, and are annoyed they had to be told. Okay, Carol shouted over the roar. That was good, that was actually good, do that again. Hammer and anvil, Wanda agreed, the red singing on her hands. I take the low, you take the high. See, this is what I mean about sharing, it's the worst, it works. Natasha was already 3 problems ahead, calling the next collapse before it formed, and Harry holding the center beside Steve. Took a single second. He could not afford to watch the 3 of them find the shape of fighting together at last. And the thing he felt watching it was so large and so unfamiliar that he had to put it away in the room with everything else just to keep his hands working. He put it away. He turned back to the field. And across the gray tide, riding his curtain of green fire, Voldemort lifted the bone-white wand and pointed it not at the line, not at the compound, but at the sky above the eastern breach where Carol hung wreathed in gold, driving the dead to ground. Harry, the pale figure, called in the voice that carried in the head and not the air, delighted, terrible, watch closely. I told the balancer I had found your lever. Let me show you how it works. The bone wand spat a bolt of green-black light, the same wrongness that had crossed Carol's forearms past Neptune, except this was not a lance. It was a working, complex and layered, and it did not strike Carol. It struck the air around her, and it began with terrible patience to close a Death Realm pocket, the kind that had built a false Sokovia in a Pittsburgh basement, opening around Carol Danvers in the middle of the sky, a wound in the world with her sealed inside it. Carol, Wanda screamed, and the red roared toward the pocket and broke against its edge like surf on a cliff, because Death Realms did not answer to chaos. They answered only to the man who had torn them and the man who owned death itself. And Voldemort turned his red eyes on Harry and smiled, and Harry understood the trap with the whole of his mind in a single cold instant. To save her he would have to reach into the pocket and master the death the working was made of, and to do that across that distance against a working this deep, he would have to spend exactly the hollow, ruinous amount of himself that the bigger fish had ordered. The snake in the storm, one lever pulled by 2 hands, they had planned it together. They had planned it for her. There it is, Voldemort said, soft and glad in Harry's head alone. The face you make when you have to choose. I have waited 11 months to see it. Choose, Harry. The broken star or your strength against the thing that comes after me. You cannot keep both. You are never going to be allowed to keep both. For 1 second Harry stood in the center of the gray field and let the trap be exactly as good as it was, because pretending a good trap was bad was how clever people died. It was good. Voldemort had built it patiently and Thanos had refined it, and it ran on a single assumption that had been true of Harry Potter for as long as he had owned death, that when the people he loved were in danger, he would reach for the largest thing he had every time without counting the cost, because the cost had only ever been his to pay. The assumption was true. That was the elegant part. It was true, and they had built a whole war around it, and the only way out was to stop being the man the assumption described in the next 4 seconds while a death realm closed around Carol in the sky. So Harry did the hardest thing he had done in either world, which was not to reach Wanda. He didn't shout it. He sent it down the resonance they'd built in a dark training room, the bell note that ran between them now whether he willed it or not. You told me you know the architecture. You built a wound in the world once. You said you know how they're made. I know how they are made. Her voice came back ragged, the red still breaking uselessly against the pocket's edge. Then you know how they're unmade, and it isn't with force. Force is what he wants. Force is the lever. It's with the thing you actually have, and I don't. He was already moving toward the pale figure on the green fire, walking, the silver green banked low, refusing the spectacle. A death realm holds a person by convincing them to stop, to despair, to agree they belong inside it. You lived inside one made of your own grief, and you walked out. You're the one person on this field who knows the way out from the inside because you found it once, so don't break the wall. Open the door, I'll lend you the key. A thread, just a thread, the smallest piece of what I am, and you do the rest because the rest is yours and was always going to be yours. And he reached not into the pocket, not for the 4,000 dead, not for the largest thing. He reached for Wanda and gave her one fine bright thread of death mastery, the cost of a candle and not a sun. And Wanda Maximoff took it and stopped throwing power at the wall. Carol. Wanda's voice changed, went low and certain, the voice of a woman who had survived the inside of her own worst day. Listen to me, it is showing you something. It is showing you the dark and the cold and the part of you that has always believed you would end up alone out there in it. Do not look at what it shows you. It only has the power you give it by despairing. So do the most you thing you can think of. Do not despair, be furious. Inside the pocket, where the death realm had built her a perfect lonely dark and was patiently explaining to Carol Danvers that this was where the road had always led, that everyone leaves, that the broken star burns out alone inside the pocket, Carol Danvers heard a voice she trusted tell her to be furious, and Carol Danvers had never in her life needed to be told twice. The gold went white. She stopped holding. She had spent her whole life holding, being the thing that absorbed the blow so others didn't have to, and the death realm had built itself around that habit, around the woman who endured. So she stopped enduring and started detonating, and from outside with Harry's thread bright in her hands, Wanda found the seam the Fury had opened and did not break the wall. She opened the door, the way out she'd found once from the inside, and turned it inside out. The pocket came apart. Carol fell out of a hole in the sky trailing white fire and absolute rage, caught herself 100 feet up, and came down on the field like a dropped star, and the dead nearest the impact simply ceased to have a shape. Never, she announced to the field, to the dead, to the universe, do that again, and went back to work with the focused joy of a woman who had been shown her own worst fear and decided to bill it for the inconvenience. And Harry, who had not spent himself hollow, who had spent a candle instead of a sun, who had refused, for once in 2 worlds, to be the largest thing in the room when the right size would do, kept walking toward the pale figure on the green fire with the whole of his strength intact and a cold, clean fury of his own banked behind his eyes. You changed the variable, Voldemort said. The delight had gone out of his voice. He had built a trap around a known quantity, and the quantity had moved. You were always supposed to reach. That is what you are. That's what I was. Harry rose off the broken ground, unhurried into the green fire until the two of them faced each other above the field with the war raging below. You've been studying an old version of me, Tom, you and your big silent friend both. You studied the man who came through the rift 11 months ago, certain he'd be alone for the rest of a very long life, who reached for the largest thing every time because there was no one to reach for instead. That man would have walked into your pocket and emptied himself to save her, and you'd have won. The silver-green climbed his arms, deep and bottomless, the real thing, the thing he'd held in reserve through the whole gray morning. But I've had a strange couple of weeks. People keep walking into the dark with me. It's done something to my arithmetic. I don't have to be the biggest thing anymore. I just have to be the last one standing, and I have help with that now, which you would not understand, because the only thing you ever split was yourself. Voldemort struck. He was fast, faster than the stories, faster than the noseless theatrical menace Harry had braced for, because a year of scavenging a defenseless world had taught Tom Riddle economy, and economy had made him lean and precise. The bone wand spat killing green in a flurry that would have ended any other living thing, and it was layered with workings beneath workings. Curses that unspooled into other curses, the accumulated cruelty of 2 worlds' worth of dark study. Harry did not decline these as he declined in fairy fire. He couldn't. Voldemort had built them out of the same root magic Harry used, will against will, and the only way through was to meet them. So they dueled, the 2 wizards in the green fire above a field of the dead, and for 90 seconds it was the closest Harry had come to a true contest in this entire universe. Light against light, will against will, the silver green and the killing green tangling and shattering and reforming, the air between them screaming with the friction of 2 impossibilities that refused to yield. Voldemort fought like a man who had nothing left to lose and everything to prove, and he was magnificent and terrible and very nearly enough. Very nearly. "You're good," Harry said between exchanges, and meant it, because the dead deserved an honest accounting, and so, in his awful way, did Tom. "You always were, that was the tragedy of you, you could have been almost anything." He caught a curse that would have unmade his heart and turned it gently into nothing and stepped through the gap it left. "But you made yourself out of the fear of dying, Tom, every choice. The soul you split, the immortality you stole, the deal you cut with the thing in the dark, all of it, the whole architecture of you, built on the one thing you could never master, which is the one thing I am." He stopped declining, he stopped meeting. He reached out one hand into the green fire, toward the lean, pale, furious thing that had haunted 2 worlds and 1 childhood, and he did not strike it and he did not curse it. He simply found the place where Tom Riddle had been refusing for 60 years and across the death of a universe to finish dying. And Harry Potter, Master of Death, gave him permission. "It's all right," Harry said, and there was no cruelty in it, which was the most terrible thing of all. "You can stop now. You've been so afraid for so long, put it down." "I will not," Voldemort said, and the bone wand came up and the red eyes blazed with the whole of his enormous refusal. "I will not be unmade by a sentimental." "I'm not unmaking you," Harry said. "I'm letting you rest. You never could tell the difference. That was always the whole of it." And he closed his hand, and the refusal that had held Tom Riddle together across 60 years and 2 worlds simply, finally let go, not destroyed, not erased, released, the way a held breath is released, the way a clenched fist opens after a very long time, and Voldemort came apart in the green fire, not into ash or horror, but into a kind of stillness, a long exhalation, the look on the ruined face at the very end almost like relief. The green fire guttered. The bone wand fell end over end and was gone into the field below. It was over. The man Harry had crossed a universe to escape, the worst thing in 2 worlds, ended above a field at dawn, quietly, with permission, in something that was nearer to mercy than anyone watching would ever quite believe. And then the 4,000 came due. The thing about an army of the dead is that something is holding it up. While Voldemort lived, his will had been the scaffold under 4,000 woken corpses, the single instruction that kept them walking. Harry had known this, he had counted on it. What he had not let himself fully reckon with in the cold arithmetic of the morning was what would happen to the doorway when the scaffold fell, because the 4,000 were not alive. But they were not at rest either, and the instant Tom Riddle let go, 4,000 stolen dead were finally all at once permitted to be what they had been all along. They came due through Harry. He was the door. Every death in range moved through him. He had told Natasha that in a small bare room over coffee he didn't drink. 11 on a normal bad day. 4,000 now in a single instant, a tide of release crashing through the one human being built to feel them. And there was no room large enough to hold a thing that size, no door he could shut fast enough, no counting that could keep pace. He felt them go, all of them, the Grey Legion turning back into the people they'd been long enough to finally rest, and the feeling was not pain. Pain would have been survivable. It was subtraction. It was 4,000 doors opening at once inside a man who was the doorway, and the draft that came through took the warmth, and then the light, and then, with terrible courtesy, took him with it. Harry Potter fell out of the green fire that was no longer burning, and hit the broken field and stopped. His heart, which he so rarely listened to the 4,000 instead and decided to go with them. The silver green went out of his skin. The cold that came off him was not his working cold, the cellar chill he used as a tool. It was the other one, the real one, the temperature of the station with the very clean light, and it spread from where he lay in a ring that browned the grass. Number Wanda was the first to reach him, dropping out of the air, the red guttering on her hands. She got them under his head and felt how cold, how wrong, how far. "No, no, you don't, Carol." Carol was already there, the white fire banked to nothing, kneeling in the frost-killed grass on his other side with her hands hovering and useless. Because you cannot punch this, there is no vector through this, and the not knowing what to do was a country Carol Danvers had spent her whole life refusing to visit. What do I do, Wanda? Tell me what to do. I can't. There's nothing to hit. He went with them. Natasha came down last and hardest, sliding to her knees, and her voice was the flat, clear calm she used over everything that frightened lesser people, except that underneath it, for the first time any of them had heard, the calm had a crack running through it. He told me. The function, not the poem. Every death in range moves through him. 4,000 just, he's the door. He went through his own door with them. He's still in there. He has to still be in there. Her hands found his wrist, and there was nothing under her fingers, no pulse, only cold. Harry, you don't get to do this. You don't get to be the one who stays behind to see them off and then leaves with them. That's not the deal. The resonance. Wanda's head came up. The red flared urgent. I can feel him barely, like a bell that has almost finished ringing. He is at the threshold. The station. The clean, bright place he told us about. He is standing there deciding, as he decided once before, except this time there is no one telling him to come back because he never had anyone to come back to. Her eyes went to the other two, fierce and wet. He came back from there once because he owned death and death could not keep him. But owning is not the same as wanting. He has to want it. He has to have something on this side worth the walk back, and he has spent 11 months teaching himself he does not. Then we tell him he does, Carol said. How do we reach him? Together. Wanda held out her hands, one to each of them. His power found mine across a dark room. Carol, yours met his past Neptune, and he pulled the both of you out of that station's lance without a word. Natasha, you have been inside the part of him no power touches, the part that counts the dead alone in the dark. He told you the function, he gave you the true thing. 3 doors he has opened to the 3 of us that he has never opened to anyone. So we use them, all 3. We go to the threshold and we do the thing no one has ever done for him. Her voice broke and held. We refuse to let him be the largest, loneliest thing in the room. Give me your hands. They gave her their hands. What happened then none of them ever fully described, not to Steve, not in any report, not even much to each other, because some things lose their shape when you make them into sentences. But Wanda Maximoff opened the resonance wide, wider than the training room, and she drew the other 2 into it. Carol's white fury and absolute refusal to lose. Natasha's clear, unbreakable seeing, her own bottomless capacity to carry what could not be set down. And the 3 of them, hands joined over a cold man in the frost-killed grass, reached across the threshold into the very clean light, to where Harry Potter stood at the edge of rest with 4,000 released souls streaming past him toward the dark. Deciding in his exhausted, bottomless courtesy that it would be all right to follow. They reached him in the bright place, and they were not gentle about it. Don't you dare, said Carol's fury, blazing white at the threshold. Don't you dare go quiet on me. You're the only thing I've ever found out here bigger than the dark. You don't get to be one more thing it takes. You promised me, said Natasha's clear, hard voice, and the crack in it was a canyon now. You told me the one was real. The promise. Nobody goes through that door while you're in the room. You're still in the room, Harry. We're in the room with you. Keep your word. You taught me, said Wanda, soft and vast and cert, holding the bridge open with the thread of his own power he lent her and never asked back. That grief is the slow work of getting big enough to hold what you cannot set down. So get big enough to hold this. Get big enough to hold us. We walked into the dark with you, all 3 of us again and again, and not one of us is going to walk out without you. Come back. There is something on this side worth the walk now. There are 3 of us, and we are not letting go of your hands. And in the very clean light, at the threshold he had stood at once before and crossed back from out of obligation, Harry Potter felt 3 hands close around his that no death realm had built, that no working could fake, warm against the cold of the station, and he understood that the arithmetic had changed again, finally, completely, that the price of being the strongest was no longer the loneliness, that someone, 3 someones, had walked all the way to the edge of the dark to pull him back, not because the world needed its weapon, but because they could not bear the room without him. He turned around. He walked back. Death, which did not get to keep what it was owned by, and which had never once in either world been able to keep him, let him go with what might, on a vast and patient face, have passed for a smile. Harry came back into his body with a single enormous breath, and the cold broke and the silver green woke in his skin, and the frost-killed grass under him went green again in a slow ring. And he opened his eyes to 3 faces bent over him in the early light, none of them composed, all of them wet, and the first thing he did, because he was who he was try to make it easier for them. Well, he said, hoarse. That's the most anyone's ever done to keep me from a perfectly good lie-down. Don't. Natasha's voice cracked all the way through and she didn't bother to fix it. Don't you make it a joke. Wouldn't dream of it, Harry said, and then, because his hands were still in their 3 hands and he had no intention of changing that, thank you. I felt you come, all 3 of you. I felt a great many things move through that threshold and never once felt anything come the other way toward me to bring me home. He looked at each of them, at Carol's white fury still ebbing, Wanda's red bright with tears, Natasha's clear eyes finally, openly seen. I didn't know it could go the other way. Nobody ever told me it could go the other way. For a moment none of them said anything because there was nothing to say that would be larger than the silence, and the four of them stayed there in the green returning grass with their hands joined over a war that was, for the moment, won. It was Steve who reached them first, across the wreck of the field, with Thor astride behind and Tony descending in a whine of repulsors, and the three of them stopped a little distance off when they saw the man on the ground. The three women bent over him with their hands joined, the ring of grass coming back green where a moment ago it had been killed white. Steve had walked away from a great many battlefields in a long life. He knew the difference between the quiet that meant won and the quiet that meant lost, and he stood at the edge of this one and could not for a moment tell which it was. "He's up," Carol said before any of them could ask, her voice still scraped raw. "He's up, don't crowd him." "I'm up," Harry agreed and proved it by sitting, which took all three of them steadying him and was less convincing than he'd hoped. The field around them had gone still in a way no battle ends still. 4,000 gray shapes that had walked south at dawn lay where they'd fallen, and they were not horror now. They were only bodies, only people, finally allowed to be done. "They're at rest," he said to Steve, because Steve was the one who would need to hear it framed as a thing accomplished and not a thing survived. All of them. He was using them as a curtain in a battery in an army, and they were somebody's, every one, before he dug them up. They're not anybody's now. They're just gone properly the way they were owed. Thor lowered Mjolnir and looked out over the still field with the gravity of someone who had buried a great many of his own. "Then we will see them buried as warriors are buried," he said, "whatever they were in life. They were conscripted into a war they did not choose, and they broke it by simply being too many to hold, and that is a kind of valor the histories never sing. I will sing it." He said it plainly, a vow, and no one in earshot doubted he meant to keep it. Later, Natasha hadn't let go of Harry's wrist, where a pulse had returned and where she could keep her thumb on the proof of it. Bury them later. "Right now somebody tells me what it cost him, in words I can write down, because I am done finding out the size of this man's debts by watching him nearly pay them. 4,000 at once." Harry leaned into the support without pretending he didn't need it, which was its own small revolution. "Through the door, through me. I knew it would come when Tom fell. I'm not an idiot. I planned the whole morning around not spending myself, and then I spent everything I'd saved in a single second because the scaffold dropped and I'm the floor it dropped onto." He looked up at the three of them, and there was no performance left in his face. None of them managed calm, just a man who had gone to the edge and been hauled back. "I went to the threshold. I've been there twice now. The first time I came back because I owned death and it had no claim on me, and I came back alone into an empty world to do a job. This time," he stopped. "Started again because the worst sentences were the ones worth finishing. This time I didn't want to come back. I want to be honest about that, because you three earned honesty by walking all the way out there after me. I decided it was all right to follow them through. I was tired in a way that doesn't have a bottom. And then there were three hands in mine that no realm could fake, and a voice telling me to keep my word, and one telling me to be furious about it, and one telling me grief is just getting big enough to hold what you can't put down. And I turned around." His voice didn't break, but it went very quiet, which was worse. "You changed my arithmetic. I've spent 11 months certain the price of being the strongest was being the loneliest, that they came as a set. You three just broke the set. I don't know what to do with that yet, but I wanted you to know you did it." Carol scrubbed the heel of her hand across her eyes and pretended it was grit. "Okay, well, don't do it again, because I am not built for the bedside thing. I'm built for the punching thing, and I just spent the worst 90 seconds of my entire rebuilt life unable to punch a single part of the problem." She glared at him with all the ferocity she had, which was considerable, and which was entirely undercut by the fact that she'd shifted closer while she did it. "Next time you plan to walk into the dark, you take a buddy. Buddy system, we're instituting it. I don't care if you're the master of death, you don't get to solo queue the afterlife." "The buddy system," Harry repeated. "For dying. For everything," Wanda said, and it landed soft and certain and unmistakable, and she didn't look away when he turned to her, which she once would have. "That is the whole of it, I think, for everything." The red had gone quiet in her hands, and what was left in her face was the thing she'd spent years too afraid to show anyone, the unguarded, enormous wanting of a woman who had decided she was done being protected from her own heart. "I held the bridge with your own power, the thread you gave me and never asked back. I want you to notice that I am not giving it back. I am keeping a piece of you, Harry, and I am telling you to your face instead of pretending it is reconnaissance." "That tracks," Natasha said dryly, and her thumb was still on his pulse and she had no intention of moving it. "She keeps a piece. Carol institutes a buddy system." She considered him, the sharp, clear seeing finally turned all the way on, no exits mapped, know where she was planning to leave to. I made you coffee you don't drink 4 times now, and I'm going to keep making it, and one of these days you're going to hold it and tell me a true thing, and I'm going to believe you, which I have not done with another living person since a building with a badly translated name. That's my piece. I'm telling you to your face too. Tony, hovering at a tactful distance with his faceplate up, cleared his throat. I want everyone to know, he said, that I am being incredibly mature about the fact that the 4 most dangerous people on the planet are apparently a thing now, and I have not made a single joke, and that's costing me physically. Pepper would be so proud. Pepper will never believe me. He paused, and the levity thinned because Tony had buried friends too. Glad you're not dead, Potter. The board would have been insufferable about it. Noted, Harry said. He got his feet under him and stood, with 3 women rising with him and Steve's hand briefly at his shoulder. And for a moment the field of the resting dead was only quiet, and the sun was properly up, and the war that had crossed the northern hills at dawn was over, its architect at rest, his garden lost. It should have been the end of something. They had earned an end of something. Then the sky went courteous and cold. It was the wrong cold again, not Voldemort's. His was gone, his scaffold fallen, his garden lost, not Harry's. The third temperature. The vast patient one that would consider cruelty beneath it. The dawn light dimmed with terrible politeness, and across the whole bowl of the sky, not on glass this time but on the morning itself, the carved old face assembled out of the brightening air and looked down at the 4 of them kneeling in the grass with their hands joined, and was unmistakably pleased. My doorman has done his work, said Thanos, and his voice rolled over the field like the tide coming into a hull. I told the little wizard his distraction need only last until I arrived. He lasted exactly that long. I am almost grateful. The carved eyes moved over the joined hands, the 3 women, the man they had just hauled back from the edge of the dark, and the pleasure in the vast face deepened into something close to tenderness, which was the most frightening expression it had worn yet. And he was right about the lever after all. Look at you. You went to the threshold to bring him back. 3 of you joined, holding his hands. You have shown me the precise shape of the only thing that can break him, and you have shown it to me yourselves freely in the open, exactly as I hoped. The face turned toward the eastern sky, where a new light had begun to burn that was not the sun, growing, descending, vast beyond the scale of anything the field had seen that morning. I am done crossing the dark, I am here, and now I know which door to open. Chapter 4 and Chapter 5, What It Costs. Thanos did not invade. Invading was for powers that doubted the outcome. He descended onto the eastern seaboard 3 days after the Field of the Dead, and he came alone, which was the part that broke the world's nerve more thoroughly than any armada could have. One figure, vast and unhurried, settling out of a sky gone the color of a bruise that had learned to be permanent, and on his left hand a gauntlet bearing 2 stones that burned, one violet, one blue. The power he had already taken from a civilization that no longer existed to miss it, and the space that let him stand on the Atlantic shore one moment, and inside the Avengers' northern stronghold the next. The Avengers met him at the stronghold because Harry told them where he would appear, and Harry knew where he would appear because Thanos had told him the night before on the dark glass of the common room window, with the courtesy of a man scheduling a duel. I will come to your house, the carved face had said almost gently. I prefer it. A man should be balanced in the place he was foolish enough to feel safe. So they fortified the place they felt safe, and they evacuated everyone who couldn't fight, and they stood in the courtyard at dawn, Harry at the center. The 3 women around him, Steve and Thor and Tony, and the rest ranged out behind, the whole roster of Earth's defense assembled to meet a single descending figure. And for the first hour it was, Harry would think afterward, the most thoroughly they had ever been beaten while doing everything right. Thor opened it because Thor always opened it. The full column of the storm called down out of the bruise-colored sky onto the spot where Thanos stood, enough lightning to crack a mountain. Thanos let it hit him. He stood in the heart of the storm with the violet stone burning, and he let the lightning wash over the gauntlet and break apart into harmless light. And when the storm guttered, he was still standing, unmarked, mildly attentive, the way a man stands in a doorway during a passing shower. That was well struck, Thanos told Thor, and meant it. You are the only one here who fights as though he has lost a world and learned the right lesson from it. The lesson being that strength which arrives too late is only grief wearing armor. Then he closed the violet hand and the power stone flared, and Thor was simply not standing in the courtyard anymore. He was 300 yards away, through 2 reinforced walls and a crater, and getting up. Thor always got up, but slower than any of them had ever seen him rise. It went like that. Steve's shield, which had stopped a god's hammer, met the gauntlet and rang and held and was driven back, Steve with it, his boots carving furrows in the stone. Tony's whole arsenal, every weapon he had built in a decade of building weapons against exactly this, broke against the violet light like rain against a window. Carol hit Thanos at the speed that turned air to thunder, the white fire roaring, the strongest blow Harry had ever seen her throw, And Thanos caught her fist in the gauntlet and held her, the white fire breaking and scattering off the stones, and he looked at her with something close to fondness. "The broken star," he said. "You burn so brightly because you are terrified of the dark you came from. I balanced your Kree once, you know, a long time ago. You are welcome." And he opened the blue stone and space folded, and Carol was suddenly very far away, somewhere over the Atlantic, screaming back toward the fight at the only speed she had, which was not fast enough to matter for the next 30 seconds, which was all the time Thanos needed. Because Thanos had never been fighting the Avengers. He had been clearing the room. He turned to Harry, and the courtyard was suddenly, terribly, just the two of them and the three women, exactly the configuration he had engineered the whole morning to produce, exactly the lever he had watched them set on the table themselves. "Now," said Thanos, "the study and the subject." Harry did not wait to be struck. He had spent 3 days deciding what he would and would not do, where the lines were, how much of himself he could spend before he stopped being the man who could decide such things. And he opened the courtyard fight with the silver green at full flood, not a working, not the patient unruining, the real thing, the bottomless thing, the power that had closed a rift over Manhattan as a chore. He reached out and told the gauntlet that it had never been forged. And for the first time since he had become the master of death, something looked at the largest thing he had and did not yield to it. "Ah," said Thanos with terrible satisfaction as the silver green broke against the two burning stones and did not unmake them. "There it is. You see, Deathwalker, the stones are not of this reality or any single one. They are older than death as you understand it. They are the load-bearing structure of all of it, the 6 forces beneath everything, and you are master of only one. You administer endings. They author beginnings and endings both. You are a very large fish in a very small pond, and I have brought the ocean." He struck then, and it was not like Voldemort, it was not a duel of equals, it was a mountain falling on a man. The violet power closed around Harry and drove him down through the courtyard stone into the earth beneath. And Harry held the silver green roaring, the only thing on the field that could hold it all. But holding was all he could do, and holding was losing slowly, and Thanos pressed down with the patience of a man who had crushed 1,000 worlds and had learned to enjoy the part where the largest thing in each one finally understood it was not large enough. "You could spend more," Thanos observed, conversationally, pressing. "I can feel you refusing to. You are afraid that if you reach all the way down to the bottom of what you are, you will not climb back out a man. You are correct, I have seen it happen to better than you. The masters of single forces always break the same way, they become the force, and the person who chose to wield it drowns. So shall we find your bottom together?" And he reached down with the blue space stone past Harry toward the three women. He did not take Wanda or Carol returning too late from the Atlantic or Natasha emptying weapons that did nothing into his back. He reached past all of them, into the evacuated stronghold, into the deep vault where the one thing on Earth that could threaten his plan had been hidden. The Mind Stone, pried from a ruined synthezoid years ago and kept under the heaviest guard the planet could build, and space folded. And the yellow stone crossed 100 yards of fortified stone and settled into the third socket of the gauntlet with a sound like a struck bell. And Thanos rose with 3 stones burning where there had been 2. "I came for this," he said, almost kindly, lifting Harry out of the broken earth with the violet light and holding him at eye level, a man inspecting a specimen. "Not for you, you were the study. The Mind Stone was the prize. With it I can balance this world without the tedium of armies, and with the 3 I now hold I am beyond your reach and beyond your friends, and the only question remaining is whether you will make me take the last 3 the hard way or whether you will in the end do the thing I have arranged for you to do." He brought Harry close, and the carved face was almost gentle. "I will give you a season, a turning of this world around its sun. Spend it as you like. Spend it with them, the 3 you cannot keep. And when I return for the rest, you will reach all the way to the bottom of yourself to stop me, because they will be in danger and you will not be able to help it, and you will drown in your own power saving them, and the strongest thing this world ever made will balance itself, which is the most elegant ending I have ever engineered." He opened the violet hand. Harry fell. He hit the broken courtyard, and the silver green guttered low, and he could not for a long moment get up. And the worst of it, the thing he would carry out of that morning heavier than the bruises, was that in the instant Thanos had reached past him toward the women, Harry had felt himself begin to reach all the way down toward the bottom, toward the place where there was enough power to stop a being who held 3 of the 6 forces, and he had felt how close the bottom was. And how little of the man would be left if he touched it, and he had been afraid, deeply and humanly afraid, not of dying he understood, but of becoming the title and losing the person, exactly as Thanos had described, exactly as planned. Thanos rose into the bruise-colored sky with 3 stones burning on his hand, and he did not gloat, because gloating was for powers that doubted. And then he was gone, folded away through space, leaving the strongest defense the world had ever assembled broken across a courtyard at dawn. and a man on his hands and knees in the rubble who had, for one terrible instant, almost stopped being a man. Carol came down beside him a heartbeat too late, as she had been all morning, and that was the thing Harry would remember about how Thanos fought, not the strength, but the timing, the patience with which he had spent the whole battle making each of them arrive exactly one heartbeat after they could have mattered. "He's gone," Harry said before she could ask. He got what he came for, the Mind Stone, 3 of 6. He got one knee under himself and stayed there because standing was, for the moment, beyond the budget. "And he told me his plan again in detail, which means it isn't the plan, except that this time," he stopped. Looked at his own hands where the silver green moved sluggish and low. "This time I think it might actually be the plan because he doesn't need to lie anymore. He's already won the only round that mattered. He just told me how the rest goes, and the worst part is I can't find the flaw in it. I've been looking since he said it. There isn't one." "Then we find one," Carol said, and got a hand under his arm, and Wanda got the other. And Natasha stood over the 3 of them with 2 empty weapons, and the flat clear comm cracked clean through. And the 4 of them stayed there in the ruin of the place they'd felt safe, beaten thoroughly while doing everything right, with a season to live before a god came back to finish the most elegant ending he had ever engineered. The world found out within the hour, because the world had been watching, and the footage of a single figure breaking the Avengers across a courtyard, and folding away into the sky with 3 burning stones did to the planet's nerve exactly what Thanos had intended it to do. They regrouped at a secondary site, a shield bunker that still believed itself secret, and the mood in the briefing room was the mood of people who had spent everything and been handed back a receipt. Thor sat with Mjolnir across his knees and a long red welt down one arm that he had not bothered to heal, because some hurts a warrior keeps on purpose, as a reminder. Steve stood at the head of the table as he always did, and for once had nothing to plan because you cannot plan against a being who tells you his plan and is correct. "Walk me through it," Steve said to Harry, but gently because he'd seen Harry on his knees in the courtyard and understood that the strongest of them had come closest to breaking. "Not the fight. We all saw the fight. The part I don't understand. He had us beaten in the first 3 minutes. Thor, Tony, Carol, all of it brushed aside. Why the theater? Why tell you his plan twice? Why give you a season? A man who can do what he did this morning doesn't need to wait. Because he's not trying to win a fight," Harry said. "He won the fight before he landed. He's trying to win an ending. There's a difference, and it's the whole of him." He had the worn black stone out again, turning it. "Thanos doesn't see himself as a conqueror. He sees himself as a corrective, a gardener. To him, balancing a world isn't violence, it's maintenance, and maintenance done correctly is supposed to be elegant. Killing me in the courtyard this morning would have been crude. It would have made me a victim, and victims become stories, and stories become resistance. He doesn't want a martyr. He wants me to do it to myself. He wants the strongest thing this world made to reach too deep, saving the people it loves and drown in its own power, because that's not a murder, that's a balance, that's the garden correcting its own overgrowth. The season isn't mercy, it's staging. He's giving the lever time to get heavier. That's the most disgusting thing I've ever heard," Tony said. He'd taken the armor off, and without it he looked tired in the specific way of a man who builds things to keep people safe and has just watched all of them fail at once. "And I once read my own obituary that Hydra wrote in advance. So, the Mind Stone's gone, which means he's got power, space, and mind. 3 of 6. What's that get him?" Together, Harry's jaw tightened and eased. Power is the engine. Space lets him be anywhere. Mind lets him reach into thought, rewrite intent, turn a defender into an asset with a wish. With those 3, he doesn't need an army because he can make our own people his the moment they get close enough, and he doesn't need to find us because space puts him in any room he pleases. The only reason he hasn't already finished this is that he wants the ending to be clean, and clean, for him, means me doing it to myself on schedule. He set the stone down. "We have until he decides the lever's heavy enough. He called it a season. I'd plan for less. He lies about everything except the things he's proud of, and he's proud of his patience, so the season is probably real, but I wouldn't bet the planet on his calendar. Then we use it." Steve looked around the broken room, the welt on Thor's arm and the exhaustion on Tony's face, and the 3 women ranged close around Harry in the formation they no longer noticed they made. "Everybody else holds the line out here. Civilian evac, hardened sights, every stone tracking asset we've got pointed at the sky. That buys time. Potter, you take whatever you need to do, whatever you're not telling me you're already planning, because I've known you 11 months and you've got the face you get when you found a thread to pull." A faint dry warmth, the first in the room. "Go pull it. Take the 3 people who hauled you off a threshold. We'll keep the world's lights on while you figure out how to keep it spinning." "Thank you, Steve," Harry said and meant it, and the two of them shared the brief soldier's nod of men who had each spent a long time being the one everyone else relied on, and knew the loneliness of it, and were glad, this once, not to be carrying it alone. Thor rose, Mjolnir in hand, the welt still bright on his arm. "I have fought beings who believed themselves gardeners before," he said. "My father knew one. They are the worst kind because they have made peace with the screaming, told themselves it is the sound of weeds being pulled." He looked at Harry. "When you have your thread, Deathwalker, and you mean to pull it, call me. I should like to be there when the gardener learns this world has thorns." And he clasped Harry's forearm, the warrior's grip, and went to do the work of holding a frightened planet together while 4 people drove north into the dark to plan the impossible. They didn't go back to the northern stronghold. It was rubble, and worse than rubble, it was the place a god had chosen specifically to teach them that no place was safe. And Steve made the call to scatter the team to the secondary sites, and Harry made the quieter call, which nobody questioned, to take the 4 of them somewhere that had never been on any roster at all. It was a house on a lake in the Adirondacks, a few hours from the black site where he and Natasha had laid 11 strangers to rest, and it belonged to no one Thanos could find because Harry had spent one of his quieter months convincing the world it had never been built, a door for himself, a place outside the count. He had never brought anyone here, he brought 3. "You have a safe house," Natasha said, standing in the main room with its wall of windows onto the dark water. "That doesn't exist. That's the most you think I've ever learned about you, and I once watched you tell Death Number. I needed somewhere the door couldn't reach." Harry built a fire the ordinary way with his hands enkindling because the silver green was still low, and because some nights a man wanted to do a small warm thing slowly. "Somewhere I wasn't the master of anything. I come up here and I'm just a man who can't sleep on a lake. It's not much. But it's mine, and now it's ours, for the season he gave us, which is a thing I want to talk about, because none of us has said the real thing yet, and I'm tired of being the strongest person in the room and the biggest coward in it at the same time." That landed. Carol, who had been prowling the windows checking sightlines out of habit, turned. Wanda settled onto the arm of the couch. Natasha didn't move, but the quality of her stillness changed, the way it did when an interrogation crossed over into the part that mattered. "He's going to use you to break me," Harry said. He stayed crouched at the fire, feeding it, because it was easier to say to the flames. "Thanos." He said it twice now, to all of our faces, and the second time he wasn't lying, because he'd already won and lying was beneath him. "The plan is simple and I can't find the flaw. When he comes back, he'll threaten the 3 of you, and I'll reach all the way to the bottom of what I am to stop him, and I'll drown there. Become the door instead of the man who holds it. He's seen it happen to others. He arranged for me to love 3 people specifically so the lever would be heavy enough." He looked up. "So the smart move, the cold tactical move, the move the man I was 11 months ago would have made without blinking, is to send you away. Break it off. Make the lever light. Be alone again, so the only thing he can threaten is a world, which I can lose and survive, instead of a person, which I can't." The fire cracked. None of them said anything for a moment. "Is that what you want to do?" Wanda asked, quietly, not afraid of the answer, just requiring it. "No," Harry said, "and that's the problem, because wanting isn't supposed to factor into a tactical decision, and I can't make it stop factoring." He sat back on his heels. "I spent 11 months certain I'd be alone for whatever's left of a very long life. I'd made my peace with it. It was almost comfortable, the loneliness, the way an old injury is comfortable once you've stopped expecting it to heal. And then the 3 of you walked into the dark after me, and pulled me back from a threshold I decided to cross and broke the set. And now the comfortable thing is gone, and I don't want it back, and I don't know how to want you 3 and protect you at the same time, because the wanting is exactly the weapon he's built. I'm asking you, all 3 of you, because for once I'd rather not decide the largest thing alone." Carol crossed the room and dropped onto the couch properly, all the prowling gone out of her. "Okay," she said, "I'll go first because I'm the worst at this and somebody should set a low bar." She scrubbed a hand through her hair. "Here's my whole deal, Potter, the thing under the brass. I got rebuilt from the photons up, and somewhere in the rebuilding I decided the safest thing was to be the fastest thing, to never be anywhere long enough for it to cost me. I left, that's my move. Things get real, I fly off into space and find a war that's nice and clean and far away, and I tell myself it's duty. It's not duty, it's that staying means somebody can take something from you, and I have had enough taken." She looked at the fire. "And here's the thing I figured out on the worst 90 seconds of my life, when your snake stuck me in a box in the sky and showed me the dark and told me everybody leaves. I don't want to be the fastest thing anymore. I want to be the thing that stays, and if Thanos thinks that's a weakness he can pull, then he's about to learn what a brick wall I am about the stuff I decide to stay for. You don't make the lever light by sending us away. You make it impossible to pull by making us a wall he can't move. That's the play. That's always been the play. We don't get smaller, we get harder to break." That, said Natasha, is the third wise thing you've said this month, and I'm now genuinely concerned about you. It's the altitude, it clears my head. I'm gonna go fly into something later to fix it. But Carol was almost smiling, and she reached over and after a moment's deliberation that cost her visibly, put her hand over Harry's where it rested on his knee and left it there and dared the room to comment. Wanda came off the arm of the couch and sat on the floor by the fire, close to Harry, the red gone quiet, her voice low and certain. I will not say it as well as Carol, because Carol says the brave thing loudly and I have always said it in the dark where it cannot reshape anything, but I will say it. She turned to him. I have loved two people the whole way down and I lost them both, and the second one I lost by my own hand in a way that nearly broke a town. So I know exactly what it costs to love something the whole way down. I know the size of the hole it leaves. And I am telling you with full knowledge of the bill that I have decided to pay it again for you with my eyes open. I kept the thread of your power and I told you I would not give it back. I meant a larger thing than I said. I am not afraid of being your weakness, Harry. I have been someone's weakness before and someone's strength, and I have learned that they are the same thing wearing different weather. Let him think love is a lever. He has never been loved by someone who has already paid the worst the bill can charge and came back anyway. I have. I will not flinch. He picked the wrong three women to threaten. She put her hand on his other knee beside Carol's, and the firelight moved on 3 sets of knuckles. And Harry looked down at them and then up at the 2 women framing the fire, and then last at Natasha, who had not moved, who was watching the 3 of them with the sharp, clear seeing that missed nothing and had spent a lifetime missing the point on purpose to stay safe. You're all looking at me, Natasha said, because I'm the one who's supposed to find the flaw. That's my job. I find the exit in every room. I have spent 20 years being unable to want anything badly enough to be bad at my job, and I told you that in a small room over coffee you didn't drink. She came closer, crouched finally at the 4th side of the fire so the 4 of them made a closed shape around it. So here's my flaw, the one I found, the one Thanos didn't account for. He thinks he engineered 3 women into loving you so he could pull the lever. He's wrong about the sequence. He didn't engineer anything. He just walked into a room where it had already happened on its own and mistook it for his design. You can't make 4 people into a wall by threatening them. We made ourselves into a wall before he ever showed up in a kitchen at 2 in the morning eating sad food, deciding we wouldn't let it make us stupid. She held his eyes. The lever only works if we're 3 separate weaknesses. We're not. We're one wall, and the mortar is the thing he thinks is the crack. That's the flaw in his plan, Harry. He's counting on us to break apart under the weight of you. We're going to do the opposite, and there's nothing in 3 infinity stones that knows how to stop people from choosing each other on purpose. The fire settled. Outside, the lake held the dark the way still water does. And Harry Potter looked at the 3 women crouched around the small, ordinary fire he'd built with his own hands in the one place outside the count, and felt the last of the 11 months' loneliness go out of him for good, replaced by the enormous frightening warmth of having at last everything to lose and 3 people who had decided out loud to lose it with him. All right, he said, and his voice wasn't entirely steady, and for once he didn't make it be. Then we don't break the set. We make him regret building it. What happened over the days that followed at the house that did not exist was, by the unspoken agreement of 4 private people, nobody's story but theirs. There was a great deal of talking first, because none of them was the kind to mistake wanting for knowing, and 4 formidable people negotiating the shape of a thing none of them had a map for took patience and false starts, and one memorable argument about logistics that Carol lost on the merits and refused to concede on principle. There was Natasha, who had been touched by 1,000 people and chosen by none, learning the difference with the wary care of a woman diffusing something, and finding, to her visible irritation, that being chosen felt nothing like the technique she'd spent her life perfecting. There was Wanda, who loved the whole way down or not at all, deciding out loud that down was where she lived and she'd simply make room as she made room for grief, as she made room for everything she refused to set down. There was Carol, who flinched at stillness and stayed anyway, white fire banked to embers, discovering that the thing she'd been flying away from her whole rebuilt life was not a trap but a hearth. And there was Harry, who had held a door shut against 4,000 dead and could not, it turned out, hold one shut against being loved by 3 people who had walked into his dark on purpose. He stopped trying. That was the whole of it in the end. He stopped holding the door and let the warmth in, and the lake house that did not exist became, for a season, the one place in 2 worlds where the master of death was simply a man who was wanted, by name, by 3 women who had each decided separately and then together that the strongest thing on earth deserved to be held as well as relied upon. The firelight went where firelight goes. The dark water kept its counsel. And in the morning, the four of them were something the English language didn't have a tidy word for, and none of them needed one, because they had stopped asking the world for permission somewhere around the second night. For the record, Carol announced over coffee that Natasha had made and Harry was holding and not drinking, "I'm still the strongest of the three of us, and I want that minuted before this turns into a whole thing where we pretend we're all equal." "You are not the strongest," Wanda said serenely into her tea. "I literally fly faster than light and punch through warships. And I rewrote a man's mind with a thought and nearly unmade a town with my grief, so let us not measure, Carol, you will not enjoy the measuring." "Okay, that's fair, that's genuinely terrifying, I withdraw the question." "Both of you are wrong," Natasha said, not looking up from the field reports she was reading because some part of her never stopped working. "Because the strongest person in this room is the one who got 3 apex predators to agree on a sleeping arrangement, and that was me, and I did it without superpowers, and I'd like that minuted." She turned a page. "Drink your coffee, Harry, it's getting cold." "I like holding it," Harry said, and the three of them said in ragged unison, "We know." And the kitchen of the house that didn't exist filled up with the particular sound of 4 dangerous people laughing at the same small thing, which was, Harry thought, a sound he would have crossed 2 universes to hear and had, as it turned out, done exactly that to find. It couldn't last because nothing did, because there was a season on it and a god at the end of the season, and they all knew it, and they spent the warmth anyway, deliberately, the way you spend a thing precisely because it's finite. But on the third morning, Natasha set down the reports, and the working part of her that never slept said the thing the warmth had been holding off. "We still don't have a plan," she said. "We have a wall. A wall isn't a plan. Thanos comes back with 3 stones, threatens us to pull the lever, and the best case is still that Harry reaches all the way to the bottom of himself and drowns there saving us. Being a wall just means he drowns saving 4 people instead of 1. She looked around the table. "I love what we've built here. I'm not unbuilding it. But I find the exits in every room, and the only exit I've found in this one is the one where he dies as a person to win as a force, and I'm not walking through it, so somebody find me another door." The table went quiet. Harry turned the worn black stone over in his fingers, the resurrection stone, the one that called the dead, the one he'd refused to use on Pietro. "There might be one," he said slowly. "I've been circling it for 3 days and not saying it because it asks something of you 3 that I don't have the right to ask." He set the stone down. "Thanos was right about one thing. The masters of single forces break the same way. They reach the bottom of the force and the person drowns because there's nothing down there to hold on to, no anchor, just the power in the dark. I've felt it, past Neptune on the field in the courtyard. The bottom is closer than I let anyone see and there's no rope down there." He looked up. "But I'm not sure that's a law. I think it's just what happens to people who reach the bottom alone." Wanda took a thread of my power and held a bridge with it. Carol's met mine in vacuum and didn't break. Natasha's been inside the part of me that counts the dead and stayed. 3 forces. Chaos that reshapes what is. The cosmic fire that endures anything. And the human thing, the seeing, the will that chooses, which isn't a force the way the others are, which is exactly why it's the one that anchors. His voice had gone quiet and precise, the strategist's voice, the HPMOR clarity that came over him when a problem finally showed its shape. "If the 3 of you were bound to me, not metaphorically, properly, your powers woven into mine through the resonance Wanda's already proven works, then when I reached the bottom, there'd be a rope, 3 ropes. Something on this side holding the man while the force does the work. I wouldn't drown because I wouldn't be alone down there. I'd be reaching the bottom with 3 people holding the other end of me. And the cost," Natasha said, because there was always a cost, and she was the one who insisted on hearing it before anyone signed. "The cost is that it binds you to me at a level that doesn't come undone." Harry held her eyes, then Wanda's, then Carol's. "What you'd feel, I'd feel. What I carry, the door, the counting, 4,000 dead coming through at once, you'd carry a share of forever because that's what a rope is, it takes the weight on both ends. I'd be asking you to pick up a piece of the worst thing about me and never put it down. And it might not even work, I've never done it. Nobody's done it that I know of. It's a theory built out of 3 weeks of evidence and a great deal of hope, which is not how I like to build things I bet a world on." He sat back. "So I'm not going to ask. I'm going to lay it on the table, the way we lay everything on the table now, and the 3 of you are going to decide, and whatever you decide, we'll build the rest of the plan around it. I won't reach for the largest thing. I learned that lesson. I'll reach for the right-sized one, even when the right-sized one is asking for help instead of dying impressively." Carol was already grinning, the fierce one, the one that meant she'd found something her size at last. You're telling me, she said, that the plan to beat a god is for the four of us to get so bound together that he literally cannot find where one of us ends and the rest begin. She spread her hands. Potter, that's not a cost. That's the whole thing we already decided to do with extra steps and a better view of the inside of your head. I'm in. I was in at the lake house. Try to keep up. I kept a thread of you and refused to give it back, Wanda said simply. You are asking if I will keep the rest. You know my answer. I told you I do not flinch. Weave me in, Harry. I have spent years afraid of what my power wants. Let it want this. Let it hold something instead of breaking it, for once. I would like to know what my chaos does when it is given a person to protect instead of a grief to drown in. And then there was Natasha, who found the exit in every room, who had spent 20 years unable to want anything badly enough to be bad at her job, and who set down the field reports for good and looked at the three of them and the worn black stone on the table. I spent my whole life being woven into other people's designs, she said. Built, pointed, fired. I never once got to choose the weave. She picked up the stone, the one that called the dead, and turned it over in her fingers the way Harry did, the unconscious mirror she'd given up trying to stop. This is the first time anyone's ever asked me whether I want to be bound to something instead of binding me and informing me after. So, yes, obviously yes. I found you a door, Harry. It just turns out the door is the four of us refusing to be separate things anymore, which is the most dangerous thing I've ever agreed to and the only one I've ever actually chosen. She set the stone down precisely. When do we start? Tony and Thor have to find us the where and the how, Harry said. The resonance is real, but it's never been done at this scale. And if we get it wrong, I take the three of you to the bottom with me, which is the opposite of the plan. We do it right or we don't do it. And the silver green woke in his hands, brighter than it had been since the courtyard warmer. If it works, the next time Thanos reaches past me toward the three of you to pull his lever, he's going to find out he didn't engineer a weakness. He built me an anchor. And a man with an anchor doesn't drown. Outside, the lake held the morning. Inside the house that did not exist, four people who had decided to stop being separate things began, over cooling coffee, to plan the unmaking of a god, and the plan did not this time end with Harry alone in the dark, and all four of them noticed, and none of them said it, because some things lose their shape when you make them into sentences. Chapter 5 and Chapter 6. Ascension. The where in the end was Norway. Thor found it because Thor knew the planet's old places the way other men knew their childhood streets. There was a fjord in the far north where the rock was older than the continents had any business being. A deep cold seam of stone that predated the rifts and the stones and possibly the present arrangement of physics. And Thor said that in the elder days even Asgard had stepped carefully there, because it was one of the few places in the 9 realms where the boundary between what is and what could be wore thin enough to lean against. It is a quiet place, he said, setting the quinjet down on a shelf of black rock above water so still it doubled the mountains. My mother would have called it a threshold. The skin of the world is thin here. If you mean to weave 4 powers into one and not tear yourselves apart doing it, you want thin skin and old bones beneath you. This place has both. He looked at the 4 of them. I will stand watch above. If the gardener comes early, he will find me between him and you, and he will find that inconvenient. Tony had spent the flight running the numbers, which was Tony's way of being afraid usefully. Okay, so Science Corner, because somebody has to be the guy who says the cautious thing, and apparently it's me now, which character development. He pulled up a model in the air, 4 braided lines of light. Wanda's mapped the resonance. Best we can tell, what Harry's proposing is a closed loop. His death mastery flows out through the 3 of you and back, and the flow is what keeps him from bottoming out because the power never pools all in one place long enough to drown him. Like a circulatory system instead of a held breath. Elegant, terrifying. Here's the part I hate. The model flickered red at the joints. The loop has to close all at once. You can't ease into it. If any one of the 3 of you can't take the load when it hits, if the rope frays, it doesn't fail safe. It fails toward Harry, all of it, all 4 of you, straight to the bottom. So before we do this, I need every one of you to be very honest with yourself about whether you can hold a piece of the worst thing in the world forever, because forever starts the second the loop closes and there's no test mode. We know, Natasha said. He told us at the lake. We chose it there. We're not going to unchoose it because you drew it in red. I had to say it. You said it, it said. She looked at Harry. How does it start? Harry stood at the center of the black shelf with the still water below and the thin old sky above, and he took the 3 hallows out, which none of them had ever seen him do all at once, the worn black stone that called the dead, a wand of pale wood that hummed against the silence, and a cloak that drank the light around it and gave nothing back. He set them on the rock in a triangle. It starts with me telling you the truth about what these are, he said. Because you're about to be bound to the thing that made them matter, and you deserve to know what you're marrying into. He crouched by the triangle. In my world, these were a fairy tale. Three brothers cheat death. Death gives them gifts that are really traps. Two of them die badly and the third lives long and goes willingly at the end. The moral is supposed to be that you can't beat death, only meet it well. But the fairy tale was hiding a true thing inside it, the way fairy tales do. Gather all three and you don't beat death, you become its master, which is worse because mastering a thing means you're responsible for it. He touched the stone. Master of Death isn't a title about power. It's a title about custody. I have custody of every ending in range. The strength is just what custody looks like from outside. And I've carried that custody alone since I was 17 in two worlds because there was no one who could share it. He looked up at the three of them. What we're about to do is make you my deputies, not my batteries, not my anchors even though Tony likes the rope picture. My deputies, you'll share the custody. You'll feel the endings too. And in exchange, when I reach the bottom, you'll be down there with me. 3 people with badges and a man with deputies doesn't drown, he reports in. A flicker of the dry warmth. Last chance to not pin on the badge. Stop offering us exits, Carol said. It's insulting. We came to Norway. Pin the badges, Potter. So he did. Wanda went first because the resonance was hers, because she was the one who'd struck the bell in the empty room. She knelt at the point of the triangle nearest the wand, and she opened the red the whole way, wider than the training room, wider than the threshold, and she reached for the place in Harry where the door was, and this time he didn't hold it shut. He opened it. He led her all the way into the room where he kept the dead, the endless soft procession, the 4,000 and the 11 and the years of them, and Wanda Maximoff, who knew the architecture of wounds because she had lived in one, walked into the worst room in him and did not weep this time. She set down her own grief beside his, deliberately, brother and synthezoid and ruined town, and she said into the resonance, "There, now it is shared, now neither of us carries our dead alone." And the red wove into the silver green and the loop began to close. Carol went second. She didn't kneel because Carol didn't kneel, but she put her hand flat on the rock beside the pale wand and she opened the white fire the whole way, the cosmic engine that had been a frightened woman remade from photons up, and she pushed it down the resonance toward Harry. "I endure things," she said. "That's my whole deal. You feel like you're gonna drown, you grab my line because I have never once in my life let go of something I decided to hold, and I'm not starting with you." And the white fire wove in beside the red, and the loop tightened, and the air over the black shelf began to sing the thin crystalline note from the training room, except larger, except deeper, the sound of the skin of the world being leaned against. And then it was Natasha, who was not a force, who had no fire and no chaos, only the seeing and the will, and who hesitated at the edge of the loop for exactly 1 second, because being woven was the thing that had been done to her against her will in a building with a badly translated name, and the old maid part of her screamed that this was the trap, this had always been the trap. "I see you," Harry said to her quietly, just to her under the singing air. "I'm not pointing you at anything. I'm not firing you, you're the one who chooses, Natasha, you always were. That's the whole reason it has to be you who closes the loop. The other two are forces, you're the will. You're the part that decides the power is allowed to do what it does. Without you it's just chaos and fire wrapped around a drowning man. With you it's a choice. So don't let me weave you, you weave you. Reach in on your own terms or don't reach at all, and either way I'll respect it because the difference between custody and capture is exactly that someone chose." Natasha Romanoff, who had been built to be the most useful person in any room and had never once chosen the weave, looked at the singing loop of red and white and silver green and the man at the center of it offering her the one thing no one had ever offered her, which was the dignity of deciding. She reached in on her own terms. And the loop closed. For a moment it was glorious, and then it nearly killed all 4 of them. The loop closed and Harry felt the custody he'd carried alone for a decade across 2 worlds flood outward into 3 people who had never felt it, and he felt them stagger under it. The door, the counting, the endless procession, the weight of every ending in range now distributed across 4 sets of shoulders instead of 1. Wanda took her share and bent and held, because she knew how to live in a wound. Carol took hers and roared, because enduring was her engine, and she fed the weight into it. And Natasha took hers and went white and silent and very nearly let go, because the seeing that made her able to read every room in the world now saw all of it at once, every exit, every ending, the death in everything, and the human mind was not built to hold the view from inside the master of death. "It's too much," she said, and her voice was very far away. "Harry, I can see all of it, every way everything ends I can't." And here was the moment the whole plan turned on, the moment Tony had drawn in red, the rope fraying, the load tilting toward the bottom, all 4 of them one slipped grip from drowning together in the cold fjord under the thin old sky. Harry did not pull the weight back onto himself. That was the instinct, the 11 months instinct, the be the largest thing instinct, and he had learned. Instead, he did the harder thing, the deputy thing, the thing he'd never been able to do because he'd never had anyone to do it with. He reached down his own loop toward Natasha's fraying grip, and he gave her not power but perspective, the thing he'd spent a decade learning, the only survival skill that mattered for carrying custody. "You don't hold all of it," he said into the loop just to her, the way he'd told her the function and not the poem. "That's the mistake. That's what drowns people. You don't hold all the endings. You hold one at a time for one breath, and then you let it go and you trust the next breath to come. It's not a flood you have to dam. It's a tide you stand in. You stood in worse tides than this and walked out. Stand in this one ending, one breath. I'll count with you. You're not seeing how everything ends, Natasha. You're seeing how everything is held. There's a difference, and it's the whole job, and you were built for exactly this. They just pointed you at the wrong thing your whole life." And Natasha Romanoff, who had been built to see and pointed at killing, turned the seeing, for the first time, toward holding one ending, one breath, the tide instead of the flood, and the view that had nearly drowned her resolved into something she could stand in, and her grip stopped fraying and tightened and held. The loop steadied. The singing in the air dropped from a scream to a chord. And the four of them knelt and stood on the black shelf above the doubled mountains, bound, deputized, sharing a custody that no one of them could have carried and all four of them could, and the silver green that came off Harry now was not silver green. It was shot through with red and white and a clear hard color that had no name, the color of a will that chooses, and it was deeper than it had ever been, bottomless in a way that no longer frightened him because the bottom had 3 people standing on it. Oh, Wanda breathed, looking at the light at the 4 of them inside it. "Oh, it is beautiful, Harry, it is beautiful. I have never seen your power look like anything but lonely before." "It's never been anything but lonely before," Harry said. He turned his hands over and the no-color light moved through them, and he could feel the fjord and the mountains and the thin old sky and the 3 people woven through him, and he could feel, far to the west and south, the patient cold weight of a being who held 3 stones and believed he had engineered a drowning, and the weight, for once, didn't feel like an ending he'd have to walk toward alone. Let's find out what it does. What it did over the days that followed was rewrite every assumption Harry had about his own ceiling. He had closed a rift over Manhattan as a chore. Now, with the loop singing and 3 deputies sharing the custody, he stood on the black shelf and reached out and felt the boundary Thor had described, the thin skin of the world, the place where what is leaned against what could be, and he could work there. Not unmake, not edit. He could reach across the boundary and hold a thing in the place between being and not being, the exact place the Infinity Stones authored from, and that was the thing he'd never been able to touch, the thing Thanos had thrown in his face in the courtyard. You are master of only one force. He still was. But a master of endings, standing on the threshold with chaos and cosmic fire and human will woven through him, could reach the doorstep of beginnings, and that was enough. That might just be enough. They tested it the way you test anything you've bet a world on, which was carefully and then less carefully, and then with Carol shouting bigger, do the bigger one, until Thor had to come down off his watch and ask them to stop unsettling the mountain. Harry held a falling boulder in the place between landing and not landing, and Wanda fed him chaos, and the boulder became, briefly, a flock of stones that had never been one rock and then was one rock again, gently set down. He reached out toward a long dead tree on the far shore and held it on the threshold, and Natasha's will steadied him, and the tree was, for a moment, both the seed it had been and the ash it would become, and the tree it was, all at once, custody of its whole self, and then it was only a tree again, but green. Carol flew him to the edge of the atmosphere, and he reached down and held the planet's nightside terminator in his attention, the line between day and ending. Billions of small endings and beginnings rolling across it every second, and he held them, one breath at a time, the tide and not the flood, and did not drown, because 3 deputies held the other end of him and counted along. "He thinks I'll reach too deep and lose myself," Harry said on the last night, the 4 of them on the black shelf with Carol's fire keeping off the Arctic cold. "That's the entire plan. He's right that I'll have to reach deeper than I ever have. He's wrong that I'll be alone down there." He looked at the 3 of them in the firelight, the deputies, the wall, the 4-person thing the language had no word for. "He engineered a lever and built me an anchor by accident, and he doesn't know it yet, and that's the only edge we've got. He's holding 3 forces. We're holding 4, woven into one, and ours chose each other, which his never will, because stones don't choose, they're chosen. That's the difference, that's the whole bet." The intel came up from the south on the 4th day, carried by a Quinjet, and Tony Stark's worst expression, the one he wore when the math had finished and he didn't like the answer. "He's not waiting for the season," Tony said the moment his boots hit the black rock. He had a tablet in each hand and the particular brightness of a man running on fear and espresso. Or okay, he is technically, but the season was never about giving you time to grieve, Potter. It was about giving him time to build the thing, and the thing is almost built, and once it's built the season doesn't matter because he won't need a lever anymore. He threw a model into the air, a sphere of light hung with 3 burning points. Carol's deep space buoys, the ones that survived. He's been folding pieces of dead worlds together. Space stone. Pulling the husks of the civilizations he already balanced into one place here, a point lit out past the moon's orbit where nothing should be, and stacking them, building an altar out of corpse planets. We couldn't figure out why. Thor figured out why. Thor's face was grim in the cold light. It is a convergence engine, he said, an old and forbidden working, older than Asgard's wisdom about such things. 3 stones cannot rebalance an entire reality, not all at once, not every world, which is what he truly wants. He has spent his long life balancing one planet at a time, and he has grown tired, as gardeners tire of pulling the same weeds forever. So he means to do it once and for all. The convergence engine focuses the stones he holds through the mass of every world he has already ended, and it gives him reach he should not have. With it, the 3 stones strike like 6. With it, he does not balance a world. He balances everything in a single moment across all of it and never has to lift the gauntlet again. He looked at Harry. That is the ending he has been staging, not your drowning. Your drowning was only the obstacle. The convergence is the goal. He removes you because you are the one being who could reach into the engine and unmake it, and then he pulls the lever on creation itself. The black shelf was very quiet. Even Carol, who filled silences on principle, said nothing for a moment. How long until it's built? Harry asked. Days. Tony's voice was flat. Maybe less. The corpse planets are almost all in position. Once the last one folds in, he lights it, and after that, he spread his hands. After that, there's no there to fight him at because there's no anywhere. So if we're doing this, we're doing it at the engine before he lights it, which means we go to him into the one place he's strongest, surrounded by the mass of every world he's already killed, while he holds 3 stones and we hold a theory we tested on a tree. He looked around at them. I want to be very clear that this is the worst plan I've ever signed off on, and I once flew a nuke through a wormhole. It's the only plan, Natasha said, which makes it the best one by default. Walk me through the engine. Where's the weak point? There isn't one, Harry said. He was looking at the model, at the 3 burning points in the corpse planet stacked into an altar, and the strategist's clarity had come over him. The HPMOR cold that saw the shape of a thing entire. That's the thing about Thanos. He doesn't leave weak points. He's not arrogant the way Tom was arrogant. He doesn't believe in his own invincibility. He engineers it, checks it, removes the flaws. There's no crack in the engine. There's no crack in the gauntlet. There's no crack in the plan, he paused, but there's a crack in the philosophy, and the philosophy is load-bearing, and that's where we hit him. Explain, Natasha said, because she'd learned that when Harry found the shape of a thing, you let him lay it out. Thanos believes endings are maintenance, Harry said. That balance is a kind of arithmetic, that the universe is a garden that overgrows and has to be pruned, and that he's the only one with the stomach to do the pruning correctly. The whole engine runs on that. He's not just using the corpse planets as mass, he's using them as proof. Every world he's already balanced is a brick in the altar, a vote, evidence that he was right. The convergence focuses the stones, yes, but it also focuses him, his conviction, his certainty that this is mercy. That's the keystone. A working that size can't run on power alone. It runs on the will of the one wielding it, the absolute belief that the ending is correct. The no-color light woke in his hands. And I am the master of death. I have custody of ending. I have stood at the threshold twice and been hauled back. I know something about endings that Thanos, for all his pruning, has never once let himself learn because learning it would unmake him. Endings aren't maintenance. They're grief, every single one. The 11 in Manhattan, the 4,000 on the field, the billions in his altar, not weeds. Grief, people who were someone's. He spent his whole life calling the screaming the sound of weeds being pulled. Exactly like Thor said, because if he ever once felt a single one of those endings is what it actually is, the whole philosophy collapses and the engine with it. The understanding moved through the group like cold water. You're going to make him feel them, Wanda said slowly. All of them, the custody. You're going to reach into his engine, and instead of unmaking it, you're going to show him what's actually in it. I'm going to give him custody, Harry said, for one moment. Every ending he's ever caused felt the way I feel them, the way I felt them alone for a decade, and the 4 of us will feel them together. Not as arithmetic, as grief. And either it breaks him and the engine breaks with him, or he didn't look away from it, or he's stronger than I think, and he holds the grief the way I learned to, and then we're in a straight fight at the heart of his power and we lose. That's the bet. That's the whole bet. I make a gardener feel his garden, and we find out whether there's a person left under 60 years of telling himself the screaming was weeds. And if you reach that deep into a working that size, Natasha said, holding 3 stones worth of endings. I reached the bottom, Harry said, the real one, deeper than the courtyard, deeper than the threshold, the place I was always going to drown. He looked at the three of them, the deputies, the anchor, the wall, which is why it was never going to work until the four of us were one thing. He built the lever, we're going to pull it on him. They built the assault the way you build anything you intend to survive, which was backward, from the moment that mattered and outward to everything that had to happen first. The moment that matters, Natasha said, drawing it on the black rock with a piece of chalk Tony had left, because she thought better with her hands and because the others needed to see it and not just hear it, is the one where Harry has both hands in the engine and is reaching for the bottom. Everything we do exists to buy that moment and protect it. He can't fight and reach at the same time once he's in the engine. He's a man standing very still doing the most important thing in the universe, and he's defenseless while he does it. So he never touches the engine until the three of us have made him a box that nothing gets into. She drew the box. That's the whole job, make the box. Hold the box, whatever's in the box stays sacred until it's done or we're dead. I like a job I can say in one sentence. Carol said, what's mine? You're the door and the wall both. You clear our approach to the engine because nothing out there flies like you and nothing out there is going to want us reaching the heart of it. Natasha marked Carol's line, a comet's arc through the corpse planet altar to its center. Then you turn around and you become the thing between the box and Thanos. Not to beat him. You can't beat him, none of us can, that's not the plan, you just have to be expensive. Every second he spends dealing with you is a second Harry gets at the bottom. You've spent your whole life being the thing that absorbs the blow. This is the big one. This is the blow you were rebuilt for. Finally, Carol said, and the fierce grin came, but there was something underneath it that hadn't been there past Neptune, a steadiness, a woman who'd found a thing worth staying for and was going to spend herself on keeping it. I've been waiting my whole life for somebody to point me at a god and say, be expensive. This is the best day of my life and we might all die. Both things. At once, Wanda, Natasha turned to her, you're the box. You hold the loop steady while Harry's in the engine. And you hold a shield around all four of us that has to survive things a shield has no business surviving. And you do both at the same time, which is two impossible jobs, which is why it's you, because impossible is your native language. She marked it. If the loop wavers while he's at the bottom, he drowns and takes us with him. So your job is to not waver, for as long as it takes, with a god trying to break you and three stones bending reality around you. I held a bridge to a dead place while a death realm tried to keep him, Wanda said simply. I will hold a loop to a living man while a god tries to take him. It is the same job. I have practiced the worst version. The red moved quiet along her hands. I do not waver, Natasha. I learned not to waver in a wound in the world. Let him come at the box. He will find it is made of a woman who has already survived losing everything and decided to build anyway. And you? Harry asked Natasha. You've given everyone a job but yourself. I'm the eyes. She set down the chalk. I'm the one without a force, remember. Chaos, fire, will, I'm the will, which means out there I'm the one who sees the whole board and calls it, because the three of you are going to be too busy holding your impossible jobs to watch the angles. Carol can't see the breach forming while she's being expensive. Wanda can't watch the flank while she's being the box. You can't see anything while you're at the bottom of the universe. Her voice was level and certain, the command voice that expected to be obeyed because it had earned it. So I watch everything and I call it, and you three trust the call the way you trusted it on the field when I made you a hammer and an anvil. I was built to read every room in the world. Nobody ever gave me a room this big to read. I'm not going to waste it. Thor, who had come down off the ridge to hear the shape of it, nodded slowly. And the rest of us are the noise, he said without resentment, the way a great warrior accepts the unglamorous half of a great plan. Steve will bring the others to the far side of the engine and make a war loud enough that the gardener must answer it, and I will be the loudest part of that war because I have a personal interest in the education of gardeners. We cannot win the fight we make. We are not meant to. We are meant to be the thing he cannot ignore so that he divides his attention so that your box gets its moment. He clasped Harry's shoulder. It is the role of most soldiers in most battles to be the noise that buys the quiet for the one who ends it. There is no shame in it. There is only whether you make enough. You'll make enough, Harry said. You always have. They walked it through 3 times and then a 4th until each of them could say the other's jobs as well as their own, until the contingencies had contingencies, until even Tony, patched in from the south, ran out of red lines to draw. And when they finished, the thing on the black rock was no longer a theory tested on a tree. It was a plan, lean and terrible and shared, with no one standing alone at any point in it, which was the only kind of plan Harry was willing to bet a universe on anymore. One more thing, Harry said, before they broke. He looked at the 3 of them in the failing Arctic light. When we're out there and it's bad and it will be bad, the loop's going to carry more than power. You're going to feel what I feel at the bottom, all of it, every ending in that altar, billions of them the way I feel them. I've had 10 years to learn to stand in that tide, you'll have none. So I need the three of you to remember the thing I told Natasha when the loop closed, because it's the only thing that's true down there. He held each of their eyes in turn. You don't hold all of it, you hold one ending, one breath, and you let it go, and you trust the next breath to come, not the flood, the tide. We stand in it together, one breath at a time, and we do not try to carry the whole ocean, because the whole ocean is what he wants us to drown in. A flicker of warmth. And if any of you forgets, the other three will be right there in the loop to remind you. That's the entire reason we're four. Don't forget it when it counts. We won't, Wanda said for all of them, and the loop hummed its quiet shared agreement, and the plan settled into the four of them like a thing already half done. They had one night before they flew to the end of everything, and they spent it the way people who understand finitude spend things, which is to say without wasting a moment of it on pretending there would be more. Tony flew south to ready the others, because Steve would bring the whole roster to the Convergence as a second front, a war to keep Thanos' attention divided while the four of them did the quiet, impossible thing at the engine's heart. Thor stayed, but he kept his watch high on the ridge and gave them the shelf, because Thor understood vigils and understood that some of them were for the living. And the four of them stayed in the small house at the head of the fjord that Thor's people had once used and the cold had long since reclaimed. And Carol built a fire with her hands instead of her fire, because she said if Harry could do the small warm things slowly then so could she, and she was competitive even about tenderness. There was less talking this night than at the lake. They had said the large things already on the black shelf in the loop, in the custody they now shared. What was left was smaller and warmer and entirely theirs, and it does not belong in any account meant for anyone but the four of them, except to say that the loop they had closed in Norway was not only a weapon. It had made them able to feel one another the way Harry felt the world, and a thing built to share the worst weight turned out to be just as good at sharing the best. And for one night, four people who had each been certain in their separate ways that they would end up alone in the dark, were not alone and were not in the dark and knew it, and let themselves have it without once reaching for the exits. Toward morning, when the others slept the shallow sleep of soldiers before a battle, Natasha found Harry awake, because Harry did not sleep, sitting in the doorway with the cold lake before him and the worn black stone turning in his fingers. Counting, she asked, and sat down beside him close with an ease she no longer had to think about. Always, but he said it differently now with the loop humming under it, 3 deputies sharing the count even in their sleep. It's quieter though, with the 3 of you carrying a share. For 10 years it was the loudest thing in my head, every ending all the time, and I built a room and shut a door and called it managing. Now it's, he turned the stone. Now it's a thing 4 people here, it's the same volume. It just doesn't fill the whole house anymore, there's room for other sounds. Like what? Like Carol arguing with Wanda about who's strongest. Like you telling me to drink coffee I'm not going to drink. He looked at her in the gray pre-dawn, the sharp clear seeing turned all the way on, no exits between them. Like the very strange and specific sound of not being lonely, which I had genuinely forgotten existed, and which I'm aware I might lose again at the engine, and which I've decided to be glad I got back even if I only get to keep it for a few more hours. Natasha was quiet for a moment. Then she did a thing she had not done with another living person since before the building with the badly translated name. She leaned her head on his shoulder and let it stay there and didn't map a single exit. If it goes wrong out there, she said, if you reach the bottom and he's stronger than you think and the grief doesn't break him, I need you to promise me one thing, and I need you to mean it the way you meant the one in the meatpacking plant, the real way. Tell me, don't you dare make it noble. Her voice was very level, and underneath the level it was anything but. Don't you go quiet and brave and alone. Don't you push the 3 of us out of the loop at the last second to spare us the bottom. I know you. I can see you planning it even now. I find the exit in every room, and that's the exit you're eyeing. Don't take it. If we go down as 4. You don't get to be the largest, loneliest thing in the room one last time and call it protecting us. That's the only promise I want. We drown together or we don't drown. Say it. Harry was quiet long enough that she lifted her head to look at him, and what was in his face was the thing she'd refused to name for 2 months and had finally, somewhere in Norway, stopped refusing. I was planning it, he admitted. You're right, it's the exit I was eyeing. 10 years of being the one who carries it alone, the instinct doesn't die just because the arithmetic changed. He put the stone away and took her hand instead, and the loop hummed warm between them. But I'll promise you the real way, the meatpacking plant way. We go as 4 or not at all, no noble exit, no pushing you out of the loop. If I drown, I drown reporting into 3 deputies, which is the least lonely way a man has ever gone to the bottom. A flicker of the dry warmth. It's a terrible tactical decision, for the record. The cold version of me would never have agreed to it. The cold version of you, Natasha said, closed a rift as a chore and counted the dead alone in the dark for 10 years. I like this one better, so do the other 2. Don't go back, and she put her head on his shoulder again, and the two of them watched the light come up over the cold water, and behind them in the small reclaimed house, two of the most dangerous people alive slept the last easy sleep any of them would have for a while, and the loop hummed its shared count under everything, quieter now, room in the house for other sounds. They flew at dawn. Carol took point because point was hers, the white fire trailing off the Quinjet like a comet's hair as she pulled them up out of the atmosphere and into the hard black where she was most herself. Wanda sat with her eyes closed and the red banked low, holding the loop steady across the climb, feeling the count, feeling the three of them, feeling far ahead and out past the moon the patient cold weight of a being who had stacked the corpses of every world he'd ended into an altar and was very nearly ready to light it. Natasha flew the second seat with the flat, clear calm she wore into things that frightened lesser people, and the calm did not crack this time, because she'd found the exit she could live with, and it was the one where nobody went alone. And Harry sat at the center of them, the Hallows on his knee and the no-color light banked behind his eyes, the Master of Death with 3 deputies woven through him, flying toward the heart of a god's power to make a gardener feel his garden. Below and behind, on 100 screens across a frightened planet, the rest of Earth's defenders launched in their wake, Steve and Thor and Tony and all of them, a second front, a war to split a god's attention. And ahead, out past the moon, the corpse planet altar turned in the dark, 3 stones burning at its heart, and the patient vast attention that had crossed so much dark to reach one small green world felt the 4 of them coming, woven into one, and was the way it was always pleased. He feels us, Wanda said, eyes still closed. He is glad we're coming, he still thinks it is his lever. Good, Harry said, and the loop hummed, and the no-color light woke all the way, red and white, and the clear color of a will that chooses shot through the silver green that was no longer lonely. Let him think it the whole way down. The first thing he's going to learn out here is that we read the trap 2 weeks ago and walked into it on purpose. The second thing he's going to learn is what's actually in his garden. He looked at the 3 of them, the deputies, the wall, the 4-person thing the language had no word for and didn't need one. Custody, he said, is shared now, all of it, whatever we feel out there, we feel together. Ready, ready, said Carol, white fire roaring. Ready, said Wanda, red banked insert. Ready, said Natasha, and reached over and took his hand on her own terms as she'd closed the loop, as she did everything now that she'd finally chosen the weave. And the Quinjet trailing 4 kinds of light pierced the dark toward the altar at the end of everything. And a gardener waited at its heart and was glad, and did not yet know that the 4 people coming to die at his lever had spent a season learning to be the one thing in 2 universes that could make him feel. Chapter 6 and Chapter 7. Master of Death, the altar at the end of everything, was the most beautiful thing Carol Danvers had ever hated. It hung in the dark past the moon, vast beyond the scale of anything she'd flown through in a decade of flying through the impossible. 100 dead worlds folded together into a single slow-turning structure, continents fused at impossible angles, drowned cities catching the light of distant stars, mountain ranges that had belonged to 100 different skies now braided into one cathedral of stilled stone. And at its heart, where the worlds met, 3 points of burning color hung suspended in a lattice of force: violet, blue, gold, the engine, the convergence, the thing that would focus 3 stones into the reach of 6 and balance creation in a single moment. It was the work of a mind that had mistaken grief for arithmetic for 60 years, and it was, Carol thought, flying toward it with the white fire roaring off the Quinjet, genuinely the most beautiful thing she had ever seen, and she was going to take it apart with her bare hands if she got the chance. Contact, Natasha said, flat and clear from the second seat. He's at the engine's heart, not moving, he's letting us come. Carol, the approach there, the seam between the 2 big landmasses, the lattice is thinnest there, that's our lane to the center. I see it, then take us in, and the second we're committed, the noise starts. Natasha touched her calm. Steve, we're in, light it up. And on the far side of the altar, the war began. Steve brought the whole of Earth's defense around the corpse cathedral's edge in a wave of light and fury. Every ship and suit and soldier the frightened planet could throw across the dark, and Thor came down the spine of it like the storm given a grudge. And for a moment the altar at the end of everything lit up with the largest battle the solar system had ever held. It was exactly as planned, impossible to ignore. It was meant to be. It was the noise, the loud half of a great plan, the thing that bought the quiet for the ones who would end it. And at the engine's heart, the patient vast figure with 3 stones burning on his hand turned at last, away from the 4 people in the small ship, toward the war breaking against his cathedral, and divided his attention exactly 1 degree, exactly as much as Natasha had drawn in chalk on a black shelf in Norway. He took the bait, Wanda breathed, eyes closed, holding the loop. He is answering Steve, the box. Make the box now while he is looking the other way. Carol brought the Quinjet screaming through the seam in the lattice, and the Corpse Cathedral's defenses woke around them. Drone husks and folded space traps and worse things stirred up out of the drowned cities, and she did the thing she was rebuilt for. She became a line drawn through all of it, the white fire trailing, clearing the lane to the center while the other three held the loop in the ship and the plan. She cleared it. She always cleared it. And then they were at the heart of the altar, in the open space before the engine, with the three stones burning overhead and the war raging at the cathedral's edge. And Thanos turned the rest of the way around and looked at them and was pleased as he was always pleased. "You came," he said. His voice rolled through the stilled stone of 100 dead worlds. Woven into one, the Deathwalker and his three. "I confess I wondered if you would find the courage. The lever is so much heavier when one understands the weight." The gauntlet flexed, 3 stones bright. "And you have made yourselves so much easier to break, all bound together. One grief shared 4 ways is still one grief. I will not even have to choose which of them to threaten. I will threaten all 3 at once, and you will reach too deep saving them, and the balance will complete itself, and I will not have lifted the gauntlet in anger even once. It is the cleanest ending I have ever staged. Thank you for arriving on schedule. We read the trap 2 weeks ago," Harry said. He stood at the center of the 4 of them, the hallows in his hands, the no-color light banked behind his eyes, and his voice carried the level discipline that had never once, across 2 worlds, let Thanos hear it shake. "We walked into it on purpose. You've been so busy admiring the elegance of your lever that you never asked the only question that mattered, which is why 4 people would willingly fly to the heart of your power to be broken." The light woke in his hands, red and white and clear shot through the silver green. "It's because we're not here to be broken, Thanos. We're here to give you something. You've spent 60 years calling the screaming the sound of weeds being pulled. We came all this way to introduce you to your garden." "Box," Natasha said sharp now, because she'd seen Thanos' hand move before he moved it, the seeing that missed nothing. And Wanda's shield slammed up around the 4 of them in the same instant the power stone flared and the first blow fell. A violet weight that would have ended a city, and the box held because the box was made of a woman who had survived losing everything and decided to build anyway. "Carol," Natasha called, "he's going to follow the power with space. He'll try to fold past the shield. Watch the..." On it, Carol was already moving out of the box into the open, becoming the thing between the engine and the god. And when Thanos reached with the blue stone to fold space and bypass Wanda's shield, Carol was in the fold in the seam of it, taking the impossible geometry across her crossed forearms the way she'd taken the death god's lance past Neptune, and holding it and screaming back at him, "You want past her. You go through me, and I have been waiting my whole rebuilt life to be this expensive. It was the plan. It was working." It was, Natasha would think later, working for exactly as long as a plan survives contact with 3 infinity stones. Which is to say not nearly long enough, but long enough maybe, if the 4 of them were faster than a god was patient. For a few impossible seconds the choreography held exactly as Natasha had drawn it on the black rock. Carol was the wall, expensive and unkillable, taking blows in the open that should have ended a star. Wanda was the box, her shield bending under the violet weight and refusing to break, the loop steady beneath everything. And Natasha was the eyes, calling each angle a half-second before it formed, the way she'd called the breach on the field, her voice the one fixed point in the chaos that all 3 of them steered by. "Carol, he's pivoting, he's done with the shield, he's coming for the engine direct, get between, already there." Carol slammed into the space between Thanos and the engine's lattice, white fire roaring, and the gauntlet caught her and drove her down through a frozen continent, and she came back up out of the crater still burning, still grinning, still between him and the thing that mattered. "That all you got, big guy? I balanced worse than you before breakfast." "You delay the inevitable," Thanos said, almost gently, and folded space and was suddenly past her, at the lattice, the gauntlet rising toward the controls of his own engine to light it early, to balance creation now rather than savor the staging. Wanda, Natasha didn't finish because she didn't have to. The red came down between Thanos and the engine in a wall that had no business existing, and Wanda Maximoff held a god's hand off the lever of reality with 2 hands and a will forged in a wound, and the strain of it whited her vision and buckled her knees, and she did not yield, because she had told Harry she did not waver, and she had meant a larger thing than she said. "You will not," she said through her teeth, the accent thick with effort, "touch it. Not while I stand. You picked the wrong 3 women, Titan. We told you. You did not listen. None of you ever listen." "Then I will go through you," Thanos said, and brought the full weight of the power stone down on the red wall, and it was too much. It was always going to be too much, and Wanda's shield cracked like ice on a lake in spring. "Harry," she called over the roar, over Carol's defiance and the violet weight breaking against Wanda's box and the war screaming at the cathedral's edge. The engine, the lanes open, it's now or it's never. He can't watch you and Carol both, Geo. And Harry Potter looked at the engine that would balance creation. 3 stones burning in a lattice over 100 dead worlds, and at the 3 women holding the box in the wall in the eyes so that he could have his moment. And he stopped being the strongest thing in the room and became instead the thing he'd spent a season learning he was allowed to be. One of 4 reporting in, reaching for the bottom with 3 deputies holding the other end of him. He put both hands into the engine. The bottom was deeper than Harry had ever let himself imagine, and it was made of everyone. He had stood at the threshold twice and called it the deep place. It was not the deep place. The deep place was here, inside an engine built from 100 dead worlds, where the endings did not come one at a time the way they came on Earth, but all at once. 100 worlds worth, billions upon billions, every ending Thanos had ever authored in his long, patient career as the universe's self-appointed gardener. Stored in the corpse cathedral as mass and meaning both, the arithmetic he was so proud of, the balance he had spent his life perfecting. Harry reached into it, and it reached into him, and for one instant the tide was not a tide. It was the ocean, the whole ocean, and it took him the way it had always been going to take him down, past the threshold, past the deep place, toward the bottom where the man drowned and the force remained, and 3 hands closed around the other end of him. "One ending," said Wanda in the loop, holding the box in the bridge, both, her voice the steady certain thing it became when she stood in a wound. "One breath, you taught me, we do not hold the ocean. Find me one, Harry, one person, start there." "You promised," said Natasha, the eyes watching the whole impossible board and somehow, impossibly, watching him too. "No noble exit, we go as 4. You're not at the bottom alone, I'm right here, I can see you, keep your word and I'll keep mine." "You don't get to drown," said Carol, who was being expensive in the open against a god and still, somehow, had a line in the loop, white fire and absolute refusal. "I have never let go of a thing I decided to hold, and I am not starting at the bottom of the universe. Grab my line, you stubborn impossible, grab it." And Harry, at the bottom, with the whole ocean trying to take him, did the thing he could only do because he was not alone. He stopped trying to hold the ocean. He found one. One ending in the billions, one person who had been someone's, on a world that no longer existed to remember them. And he held that one for a breath, the only funeral, and let it go, and trusted the next breath to come, and it came, and he held the next one, and the 3 deputies held him while he did it, and the ocean became, breath by breath, a tide a man could stand in even at the bottom of everything. He did not drown. For the first time in the history of the title, the Master of Death reached the very bottom of what he was, and a man came back up the other side of it, because 3 people who had chosen the weave refused to let the Force keep him. And then Harry Potter, standing at the bottom of the universe with billions of endings in his custody and 3 deputies holding his hands, turned the whole of it around and reached up out of the engine, across the open space, toward the patient, vast figure who had made every one of these endings and called it mercy. "You wanted me to feel them," Harry said, and his voice came from everywhere now, from the engine, from the stilled stone of 100 worlds, from the no-color light that filled the heart of the altar. "You built a lever out of it, the strongest thing in 2 worlds, drowning in the grief of the people it loves. But you never once asked what I'd do at the bottom if I didn't drown Thanos, because you couldn't imagine anyone reaching it and coming back. So let me show you. You've spent 60 years administering endings and calling them arithmetic. You've never felt a single one, not one. You made yourself unable to because feeling them would have unmade you. The custody gathered billions of endings, every world in the altar held one breath at a time across 4 sets of shoulders. I'm the Master of Death. I have custody of these, and I'm going to give you, for one moment, what I've carried alone for 10 years and now carry with 3 people who love me. I'm going to let you feel your garden." And he pushed, not power, not a working. He pushed custody. He reached across the open space and into the being who held 3 stones, and he opened the door he had kept shut for a decade, and he let Thanos feel them, not the idea of them, not the count, not the arithmetic, but the things themselves. The way Harry felt every ending in range, the way Wanda had wept at the threshold of him in a dark training room. Every world in the altar, every person on every world. The young ones who were always heavy, the old ones, ready or not, the mothers who got children under chassis and the children who didn't make it. Billions of them, each one someone's, each one a grief and not a weed, the whole monstrous, beautiful ocean of what Thanos had done, felt all at once, the way the gardener had spent 60 years making certain he would never have to feel it. Thanos screamed. It was a sound no one who heard it ever forgot, the sound of a being who had built his entire self on a single load-bearing lie, discovering in one moment, with 3 stones burning uselessly on his hand, that the screaming had never been the sound of weeds. The Power Stone guttered. The convergence engine, which ran on his certainty as much as on the stones, which needed the absolute conviction that the ending was correct, flickered as its keystone cracked, because the gardener could no longer hold the belief that made the whole working possible. He fell to one knee in the open space, the gauntlet clutched to his chest, and the carved old face that had worn tenderness while engineering a man's suicide twisted around something it had refused for 60 years to permit. Thanos said, and his voice had lost the rolling tide of it, gone small, gone almost human. I did not, they were not, I balanced, it was necessary, it was mercy, it was grief, Harry said gently, the way he'd said it's all right to a dying man above a field at dawn, because cruelty had no place here even now, especially now. All of it, everyone, you felt it just now the way I feel it always. That's the custody, that's what you wanted me to drown in and what I learned to carry, and what you spent 60 years refusing because you knew you always knew. At the moment you felt even one of them honestly, the arithmetic would stop adding up. The no-color light filled the altar. You're not a gardener, Thanos, there's no such thing. There are only people who feel the endings and people who have made themselves unable to. I'm the first kind. I just made you, for one moment, the first kind too. And now you have to live in a universe where you felt your own garden, and I think that's a worse balance than any you ever struck. And I think some part of you, the part under the 60 years, has wanted someone to do this to you for a very long time. The convergence engine was failing now, the keystone gone, the 3 stones flickering in their lattice as the working that focused them came apart for lack of the certainty that had built it. Thanos knelt in the heart of his own collapsing cathedral with the gauntlet against his chest and the grief of 100 worlds in him all at once, and he did not rage and he did not strike because there was nothing left in him to strike with. The gardener had felt the garden. There was no coming back to the arithmetic from here. Finish it, Thanos said, and his voice was the smallest it had ever been. You are the master of death. You have custody. Administer mine. I have earned the ending. I have earned all of them, every one I felt. I cannot. The carved face bent. I cannot carry this. You carry it always. How do you carry this? With help, Harry said. Which you never let yourself have, because help meant admitting you couldn't do it alone, and you'd built your whole self on being the only one with the stomach for it. He looked at the kneeling god, and at the 3 women holding the box and the wall in the eyes, and the war winding down at the cathedral's edge as Steve and Thor and the rest felt the engine fail. I'm not going to administer your ending, Thanos. That's what you want, and it's the last easy arithmetic you've got left, and I won't give it to you. You don't get to feel your garden for one moment and then escape it. You're going to live. You're going to carry what you made the way I carry it, except alone, because you spent 60 years making sure you'd have no one. That's the balance. That's the only one that was ever fair. The gauntlet came off Thanos' hand because he let it, opening his fingers the way a man opens them after a very long time, and the 3 stones came loose from their sockets and hung in the no-color light, and Harry did not reach for them with greed, because greed for the load-bearing forces of reality was the exact mistake that had made the kneeling thing in front of him. Carol. He didn't raise his voice, the loop carried it. The stones. They go back where they're guarded, all 3, mine to earth where it belongs. You're the only one who can carry that much across that much dark without it changing you, because you've already been changed by worse and stayed yourself. Take them home. Took you long enough to give me the cargo job, Carol said, and came down out of the open space where she'd been expensive against a god, the white fire ebbing, and she gathered the 3 stones into a containment field she built out of pure refusal to let them touch her, and she held the engine of all 6 forces in her hands and remained, stubbornly, entirely Carol. Don't do anything heroic while I'm gone. We've talked about the solo queue thing. Buddy system, Harry agreed. Go. She went, a comet trailing 3 burning colors back toward the distant blue speck of home, and the corpse cathedral darkened around the place where the engine had been, and the war at its edge fell quiet as Steve and Thor and the rest understood, the way soldiers understand, that the loud half of the plan was over because the quiet half had won. But the altar was still made of 100 dead worlds, and the billions of endings Harry had pushed into Thanos were still, also in Harry, in the 4 of them, in the custody they shared, and they could not simply be set down, because that was not how custody worked. Harry had told them at the lake, it doesn't go anywhere, you get big enough to hold it. There's one more thing, he said, and it's the hardest, and I can't do it alone, and that's the only reason I can do it at all. He looked at the stilled cathedral, the drowned cities, the braided mountains of 100 skies. These worlds are gone, I can't bring them back. Reaching that far, authoring beginnings instead of administering endings, that's the drowning, that's becoming the force, and I promised Natasha no noble exits, which includes the noble exit of playing God with the dead. His voice was very quiet. But the people in this altar were never laid to rest. He stored them, as mass. As proof, billions of endings held open for 60 years to feed an engine, and not one of them ever got the breath, the only funeral, the simple dignity of being let go. I can give them that, we can, it's what custody is for. It's the whole reason the title isn't a curse. He held out his hands to the two women still beside him, Wanda and Natasha, the box in the eyes. It's going to be the largest thing we've ever done, and it's going to feel like the bottom, and we're going to do it the way we do everything now. One ending, one breath, billions of times together, will you? You even have to ask, Wanda said, and took his hand, the red gone soft and cert. Buddy system, Natasha said, and took the other and didn't map a single exit. And the three of them, woven into one, stood in the heart of 100 dead worlds and did the work the title had always been for. Not power, not spectacle, custody. One ending at a time, one breath, the only funeral, billions of times, faster than time should allow because the loop let them share the count. And the corpse cathedral that Thanos had built as proof of his arithmetic became, slowly in the no-color light, a thing it had never been allowed to be. A graveyard tended every soul in it, finally noticed, finally held, finally let go. The drowned cities dimmed. The braided mountains settled. 100 worlds worth of the unrested were, at last, at rest, and the altar that had been built to balance creation became instead the largest act of mourning the universe had ever held, performed by 4 people who had learned that grief was just the slow work of getting big enough to carry what you couldn't set down. When it was done, the cathedral was only stone and quiet, and the no-color light dimmed to its banked everyday glow, and Harry Potter stood between 2 women at the heart of it, swaying, hollowed, entirely alive, anchored home. Thanos watched it all from his knees. He did not move while they worked. He could not have, the grief was in him now, and it had taken the thing that let him stand. But he watched the 4 of them, 3 now, with Carol gone homeward, lay to rest the billions he had stored, and he watched them do it together, sharing the weight he had spent 60 years cert only he was strong enough to bear alone. And the carved old face, when Harry finally turned to him, wore the one expression it had never worn in all its long, patient career. "You could have let me die," Thanos said. The small human voice, "It would have been mercy, by my own arithmetic it would have been correct." "I know," Harry said, "that's exactly why I didn't. You don't get arithmetic anymore. You get to carry it like the rest of us and learn what everyone who's ever grieved learns, which is that you carry it better with help, and you spent your whole life making sure you'd have none." He crouched so they were level, the master of death and the gardener who had felt his garden. Thor's people have a place that can hold you, not a prison, a place. You'll be alone with what you made, which is the only sentence that fits, but the door won't be locked, because the day you decide you want help carrying it instead of dying to escape it, there'll be someone on the other side of it. Probably Thor. He has opinions about gardeners and a great deal of patience. He stood. "That's the balance, Thanos, the fair one. You taught the universe that endings are arithmetic. I'm going to spend the rest of a very long life teaching it that their grief and that grief is survivable and that the surviving is done together. You're my first student. You're going to hate it. Good." And Thanos, the mad titan who had balanced 1,000 worlds and very nearly balanced them all, bowed his head over the grief he would carry to the end of his days and said nothing, because there was nothing left in him that was larger than the silence, and for once in his long life he let a thing be larger than himself. Thor came across the quieted cathedral on foot, which surprised them until they understood it. He could have flown. He chose to walk the long way across the braided stone of 100 laid-to-rest worlds with Mjolnir held low and his head bare, because some ground a warrior does not fly over. He had felt the funeral from the far side of the battle. They all had. Steve had ordered the guns silent the moment it began, and the whole of Earth's defense had hung in the dark and witnessed 3 people lay billions of strangers to rest, and there was not one soldier in that fleet who would ever be entirely the same. "I have seen many things end," Thor said, when he reached them. He looked out over the stilled cathedral at the graveyard it had become, tended and quiet under the distant stars. "I have ended many of them myself. I have never seen anyone do that, more than that many, hold that much and not be broken by it." He turned to Harry, and there was something close to reverence in the old god's face, and Thor did not give reverence cheaply. "On Asgard we believed the dead required a witness to pass well. A name spoken, a fire lit, someone to mark the leaving. You gave billions of the forgotten a witness all at once, when no one in all the long history of the universe had bothered. Whatever else you are, Deathwalker, you are the truest mourner I have ever stood beside. I am honored to have made the noise that bought you the quiet." "The noise mattered," Harry said. "He'd have folded space and stopped me in the first 10 seconds if you hadn't given him a war he couldn't ignore. We did it together, Thor, all of it. That's the only way it was ever going to get done." Thor inclined his head, accepting it, and then he looked past them to the kneeling figure at the dead heart of his own collapsed engine, and his face changed into something harder and older. "And this," he said, "the gardener, He lives, Harry said. I made that decision. I'll defend it to anyone who wants to argue it, including you. He felt his garden, every soul of it, the way I feel the dead. He's going to carry that the rest of his days alone, because alone is the only sentence that fits a man who spent his life making sure no one would carry anything with him. He met Thor's eyes. Your people have a place that can hold him. Not a cage, a place. Somewhere he can be alone with what he made until the day he wants help carrying it instead of death to escape it. I'm asking you to keep that door unlocked. It might never open. But it has to be unlocked, because the whole point of what we just did is that the answer to grief is help. And if I lock his door, I'm telling the universe I didn't mean it. Thor was quiet for a long moment, looking at the thing that had broken his hammer and very nearly broken creation, the thing that now knelt grieving in the ruins of its own certainty. My mother would have agreed with you, he said at last. She believed mercy was the harder discipline and the braver one, and that the gods who forgot it stopped deserving the name. I will take him. I will keep the door unlocked. And I will check it myself now and again, because patience with gardeners is apparently to be my burden, and there are worse ones. He almost smiled. You have given me a very strange retirement, Death Walker. Steve's voice came over the comm then from the fleet hanging silent at the cathedral's edge. Whatever you four just did, he said, the whole world felt it. Every stone tracker, every sensor, every person on Earth who was looking up. They felt the engine die, and they felt the other thing. The morning. We're going to spend years explaining what happened out here, and most of it nobody will believe, and the part they'll believe least is the part that's most true, which is that the strongest people we had won the biggest fight in history by grieving harder than a god could stand to. A pause, and the warmth came through the static. Come home, all of you. You did it. You're done. Come home. But they didn't come home, not right away, because there was the matter of 3 stones to deliver and a god to deposit in an unlocked room and 100 laterest worlds to leave with the dignity the dead were owed. Carol took the stones. Thor took Thanos, gathering the broken gardener up without cruelty and without gentleness, the way you carry a thing you intend to be responsible for. And the 3 who remained stood a moment longer in the quiet cathedral. They had turned from an altar into a grave, hollowed and swaying and holding one another's hands in the loop that had carried them all the way to the bottom and back. I felt every one of them, Wanda said softly. The red was almost gone from her hands, spent peaceful. Through you. Billions, I thought it would break me. It did not break me because the 2 of you were there, one breath at a time. She looked at Harry and at Natasha, and her voice was wondering. You carried this alone for 10 years, 1 world's worth every day alone, and I complained about my 3 dead. A small sound that was almost a laugh and almost a sob. I will never again think my grief is too large to share. You showed me there is no such size. There is only whether you let someone help you hold it. That's the whole lesson, Harry said. It took me a universe and a half to learn it, and I only learned it because the 3 of you wouldn't let me keep being the largest, loneliest thing in the room. He squeezed their hands, the loop humming its tired warmth. Let's go home. Carol's going to beat us there and be insufferable about it. Carol caught up with them over the moon, because of course she did, decelerating from a speed that bent light into a lazy orbit alongside the Quinjet with the smug satisfaction of a woman who had personally delivered 3 Infinity Stones to their proper guardians, and wanted everyone to know it had been easy. Mine stones back on Earth, locked down. Steve's got eyes on it, she reported, sliding into the cockpit and dropping into the seat beside Natasha like she hadn't just crossed the solar system twice. Power and space are off-world with people Thor vouches for, which I'm choosing to trust because I am too tired to audit a Norse god's references. Also, I broke the sound barrier of 3 separate planets, and I want that minuted. She looked back at Harry, slumped and hollow-eyed and entirely alive in the center seat, with Wanda's head on his shoulder and the loop humming its quiet, shared exhaustion through all 4 of them. You laid them all to rest, the whole altar. I felt it from halfway home. Billions of them. Her voice lost the brass for a moment. That's the biggest thing anyone's ever done, Potter. Bigger than closing the rift. Bigger than any of it. We laid them to rest, Harry said. All 4 of us. I couldn't have held 1 breath of it alone. He turned his head, careful of Wanda, and found Carol's eyes. That's the part that matters, not the size. The 4. I've done large things alone before. They were never worth this much. He's getting sentimental, Carol announced to the cockpit. The god-killing made him soft. I'm into it. Don't tell anyone I said that. Everyone heard you say that, Natasha said. It's on the comm. Steve definitely heard. Steve would never weaponize my feelings. Steve is absolutely going to weaponize your feelings, came Steve's voice over the comm, warm and dry and tired in the specific way of a man who had held a war loud enough to save a world and was glad to put it down. Welcome back, all of you. The planet's still here. The people are scared and confused, and they're going to want a story that makes sense, and we'll give them one that's mostly true. Come home, there's coffee. He doesn't drink it, all three women said at once in ragged unison, and Harry started laughing, the worn-out helpless laughing of a man who had been to the bottom of the universe and back and found on the far side of it that the thing waiting for him was a joke about coffee, and it was the best sound any of them had heard in a season. They went back to the lake house that did not exist eventually after the debriefs and the careful public truths and the slow work of a world catching its breath. It was autumn by then. The lake had gone to slate and the trees around it to fire, and the four of them sat on the dock at the end of a day that had asked nothing of any of them, which was, they had all agreed, the rarest and most precious kind of day. Harry had the worn black stone in his hand, turning it, and he was not counting, or he was counting quietly, the way a person hums without noticing, because the count was always there, the door always open a little, the custody never fully set down. But it was a four-person sound now. It filled a corner of the house instead of the whole of it. There was room for other things. There was room for Carol losing an argument about whether she could skip a stone farther than Wanda could float one across the water without touching it, an argument she was losing badly and contesting fiercely. There was room for Natasha, who had made coffee and brought it out in 4 mugs and put one in Harry's hands knowing he wouldn't drink it, sitting close against his side with her head on his shoulder and not a single exit mapped in any direction. "You're quiet," Natasha said. It was the thing Carol had said to him on the dark edge of the solar system, a lifetime and a season ago, and they both knew it, and that was why she said it. "I'm listening," Harry said, which was what he'd answered then. "There's a sound, underneath the quiet, you hear it. What is it this time?" He turned the stone over once and put it away for good or for now, which with the Master of Death amounted to the same thing. "It's the sound of not being lonely," he said. "I'd forgotten it existed, back when I came through the rift certain I'd be alone for the rest of a very long life. Then 4 of us happened, against every tactical instinct I had, and now I hear it all the time, and I keep waiting for it to stop being strange, and it keeps not stopping, and I've decided I don't want it to. The strangeness is the proof it's real." He looked out at the slate water and the burning trees and the 2 women arguing about physics at the end of the dock and the one against his side who had chosen the weave on her own terms. Thanos thought love was a lever. He spent his whole long life never being loved by anyone, and he genuinely believed he understood it well enough to weaponize it. He was the most powerful being I've ever faced, and he never once knew the simplest thing, which is that you can't pull a lever made of people who have decided to be one wall. I almost feel sorry for him. I do feel sorry for him. He's going to spend a very long time learning what we learned in a season, and he's going to learn it alone, because that's the only sentence that fit, and it's the worst one I could have given him, and I gave it on purpose. "Good," said Wanda from the end of the dock, where she had clearly been listening, because she was always a little inside the edges of him now and had stopped apologizing for it. "He deserved a worse thing than dying. You gave him living. It is the most ruthless mercy I have ever seen, and I have seen yours up close, and I am keeping it along with the thread, along with all of it." She let the stone she'd been floating settle gently onto the water's surface, where it sat for an impossible moment before sinking. "I win, by the way, Carol, I win. Mine traveled farther and I never touched it." "That's cheating, that's literally cheating. You used magic. You fly faster than light. Do not speak to me of unfair advantages." "That's okay, that's fair. I withdraw the objection, but I want it noted that I'm the strongest." "You are not the strongest," Wanda and Natasha said together, and Harry started laughing again. And the sound of it carried out over the slate water and the 4 kinds of light that the 4 of them made, even at rest, even doing nothing, even on a day that asked nothing of them. He had crossed a universe carrying a door no one else could feel, certain that the price of being the strongest was being the loneliest, that they came as a set and the set could never be broken. He had been wrong about the certainty, which he was rarely wrong about, and he had never in 2 worlds been so glad to be wrong. The strongest Avenger sat on a dock at the end of everything with 3 women who had walked into his dark on purpose and refused every time to let him face it alone. And the count was quiet, and the coffee was warm in his hands, and he did not drink it, and 3 voices told him at once that they knew, and the lake held the last of the light, and Harry Potter was at long last not alone. "Drink your coffee," Natasha said against his shoulder. "It's getting cold." "I like holding it," Harry said. "We know," said 3 voices, and the fire-colored trees let go of the day, and somewhere a stone that Wanda had skipped was still, impossibly, deciding whether to sink, and none of them got up, because there was nowhere any of them needed to be that wasn't exactly here. Chapter 7 End.